Welcome to the Happiness Matters podcast with me, your coach, Julia Seal, where we explore the puzzle of whole being happiness as professional women in our midlife, how to coach ourselves and live into the best version of ourselves, resilient, creative, and thriving, no matter what. Happy holidays! I hope you're all getting a chance for some downtime as 2021 draws to a close. Today's episode is a special episode for you over this holiday season. It's all about toxic conflict in your midlife relationships and what to do. I know, what a topic for this week. Actually, it's a combination of 4 recent conversations with Jamie Jenkins from Lemon Rebellion, where we were talking about how to make it through the holidays. We look at some of the most poisonous of toxic behaviors, ones that can spell death to a relationship, whether it's with your loved ones or even your colleagues at work. So they're criticism and blame, defensiveness, sulking and the cold shoulder, and contempt. So here today you'll find tips on identifying them correctly, how to actually neutralize them, reduce the heat in the moment, and also how to look after yourself while strengthening your own inner power. Look in the show notes for the timestamps for each of these 4 topics so you can jump to the conversation you want immediately. Or if you'd rather watch the videos, go to my channel on YouTube, Happiness-Matters.coach, and look for the relationships playlist. So enjoy. And I really hope this helps you have a special holiday week.
Hey everyone, good morning. I hope you've had an awesome week here. It's Friday and I'm very excited because here in just a minute we're going to be talking live with Coach Julia Seal about 4 toxic behaviors that cause a lot of problems in relationships. We're going to have one topic each day over the next 4 days into these topics to learn how to identify them, how to stop them in our lives. And Julia's here. She should be joining any second. There you are. Hi, Julia.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm fine. Hi, everyone. It's Friday, almost Friday evening here. So
Man,
hopefully
time is
the end of all
flying.
conflict.
Yeah, I don't know if it's happening for you, but time is flying. I feel like I blinked my eyes and November was gone. And I'm hoping December is like a little bit more, a little bit slower paced, but let's see.
Yeah, I think also a lot of people in the States were talking about, Thanksgiving felt quite late and it's like one thing after another.
Yes.
So it is. Whatever cropped up at Thanksgiving, relationship-wise, is just escalating before Christmas.
Yeah, and I think it gives us a chance to be really, really aware and like a bite-sized dose before we get into these, more extended holidays in December of, okay, what do we need to keep our eyes and our hearts open to, and how can we kind of show up in the most positive, powerful way that we can, kind of given our capabilities and situations. So I'm excited to talk to you today. Before you came on, I had like 30 seconds and I was like, all right, the next 4 days are dedicated to talking about 4 toxic behaviors, right? That show up in relationships and then either create conflict, really, right? Tell us a little more about how, these 4 behaviors kind of at an overview level and how they tie into relationships.
Yeah, I think the first thing really, most of us hear the word conflict and we kind of go, don't want conflict, right? So yeah. It's important to realize that conflict is kind of something that's going to exist in every relationship. And so some kind of conflict is actually really healthy because we're not all the same. Right? So everybody has their own dreams, their own wishes, their own way of doing things. And so the minute you're in relationship with someone, there is going to be because basically we're not getting our own way, right? So we're gonna butt heads. But what I want to talk about these over these 4 days is what we refer to in the coaching world as the poisonous conflict behaviors, right?
Okay.
Or the toxic conflict behaviors, because these ones have been identified as, if they run rife in a relationship, they actually spell disaster, because they start to break down the relationship. And then there's almost like no coming back from it. I know I spoke about this in a previous session with you, but from my work in employee engagement, it's really useful to remember that the research is showing us, and it's research by Gallup, that the effect of a disengaged employee at work, or a negative person who doesn't want to be in the company, who's who's kind of doing a lot of these toxic behaviors within their job, they have a 9 times effect on their colleagues than a positive person.
Yeah.
So that's how powerful they are. So now you bring that into your family relationships. Now, family, yes, we might bar someone from coming to our home if things have got really bad, but family's around forever. And so I think it's helpful for us to look at these kind of the more toxic behaviors, because there's all kinds of things we can do to neutralize them, either if we're doing them, and most of the time we won't even admit if we're doing them, or if we're kind of part of it and we're intertwined in the dynamic, which happens a lot in families because we've got history, right?
Right.
Or if we're just seeing it from other people, what can we do about it? So I want to look at those 4 particularly, because I think they can really help us between now and Christmas if we get our heads around.
Yeah, and this time is when we have to have those relationships in our face, because the holidays brings us together, and a lot of us are blessed to have family members that we love and we enjoy and get along with most of the time. But there's almost always, at least 1 or 2 relationships in there that can be a little tense and make things a little hard. And you and I have talked about before how it feels like even in these times of disposable relationships, quick media, like we see someone that doesn't agree with our political view, with our, I don't know, a life choice or another, and it's almost like we're being told all the time, cut the people off, cut them out. And what I think is really interesting about what you're saying is that robs us of an opportunity to really both go deeper within ourselves and to create a deeper, more meaningful relationship with others by not just running away every time someone takes an opposing viewpoint on a topic that maybe from like a moral or ethical perspective is important, but maybe doesn't affect our day-to-day relationship with a person. So I don't know if we'll get into that or not over these 4 days, but I love your point of view on that from what we've talked about before, because I think it's such a contrast to what we hear over and over and over again, kind of in current consumable, rapid, fast media sources.
Yeah, and I think, I've passed menopause, right? And what I'm looking back on my life saying, well, what are the patterns in my relationships? The same people, the same types of people, the same kind of unhealthy conflict just kept showing up and showing up and showing up until I was prepared to sit with it for longer and address it. So it is great to sort of say, oh, this person's got negative energy, just get rid of them. But actually in coaching, people don't have an effect on us, right? We have an effect on us. And this is what's so interesting. If someone triggers you, that's what I want to really talk about in our coaching, is because that isn't true, right? It's what you're thinking and feeling about that situation, the words that they're saying that are triggering you, because, it will trigger you, but it won't trigger someone else. So it's neutral to someone else. So, that we can talk about in more detail because that's a little deeper. But these toxic behaviors, we're working at the behavior level right now. So these are kind of actions that we can take. Then they are useful for conflict, unhealthy conflict in the moment. And then they invite us to start looking at what's underneath. and to go that little bit deeper about the other person, what's going on for the other person, which brings a level of understanding and possibly even compassion. And then what's actually going on underneath for us. And then that's the exciting stuff, right, to work with in coaching, because like you were saying, I always talk about step into what's the most difficult, because that's your greatest growth. But if you get there, it's also your greatest happiness and your real whole being happiness. So, you know, always that's the invitation, is to go where it's,
where it's sticking.
Yeah.
I want to take a second and just welcome and say thanks for everybody that's watching. I see some great friends there listening in. It's good to see you guys. Feel free to throw anything in the comments around this topic. So today, let's see, the 4 toxic behaviors that we are going to talk about over the next 4 days, just to give a little intro, are criticism, blame, contempt, and then sulking and defensiveness. And today we're really going to focus on criticism, how it shows up in others, how it shows up in ourselves, right? And then how to both identify that and dissolve and move kind of through it, so it doesn't have that power, like you're mentioning, kind of over us or over the relationship. Thanks, Lisa. She gives us some claps. Thanks, Laura.
And I'm also clapping. I chose this one to start with because this one is actually my most difficult one and has been the most challenging for me. So, you know, if you think about all of these and you think about, so there's criticism, blame, defensiveness, which is the other side of criticism, sulking and stonewalling, and then the last one is contempt, which is kind of the worst of the lot. But and you think about for yourself, what gives you that, like you just don't even want to be in those situations. You want to, like, for me, it's definitely criticism. I don't know, what do you think it is for you? Which is probably the most tough for you or triggers you the most?
When I receive it, when I'm on the receiving end of it, honestly, for me, it's contempt, because I find something when I'm experiencing contempt from someone else, I feel almost like my humanity is denied. Like I'm invisible as a being, and that triggers some of my deepest wounds, I think. So the other ones, I mean, I don't enjoy any of them, obviously, but contempt is the one that really just hits me personally.
Yeah, so that's good. So if anyone else wants to tell us what's going on for you, which of those 4 are horrible, let us know. And we are going to get to all of them over the next 4 days.
Yeah, over the next 4 days.
Yeah, so hopefully these are very useful, in, like I said, in the moment, things you can do, but they are actions. We're not going deeper into what's really going on, but we are opening it up a little bit and softening it a little bit more. And really, Jamie, where we need to get to with any conflict type situation, in order for conflict to be useful to us, is we have to move, and I use this terminology a lot on the podcast. So I don't know if any of you follow Happiness Matters in Midlife, but you'll see my coaching tools on the podcast. And I talk a lot about moving from being reactive to being responsive. Because when we're in reactive, we have gone into a fight or flight way of being, right? Our body and our brain, our primitive brain, is seeing us being under threat. So that is when, like, someone criticizes me and my heart starts going, or I can feel my pulse go. I am actually in reactive mode before I've even done anything, right? So my body is now going into survival mode. So it's really useful to look for your red flags, to know when you're actually in that reactive mode. So for me, there's a tightening in my chest, and I often take my heart rate because I can feel it going.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of awareness to actually notice in your body. So is that one of the ways that we start to connect with when these things are happening, to become more self-aware so we can respond instead of react?
Yeah. Because we're not, we might, from this live, for example, you might pick one idea that's going to be really useful to you and you can apply it. But it's quite difficult to apply any of these tips if you are still in reactive mode.
Makes sense.
So it is this shift from reactive to responsive. And I'm more going to talk about this and how do we get there in every single live, because that is the secret to everything, really.
All right, tell us about it. Let's get into it. That's good.
Yeah. So I think, actually this week's podcast is about the vagus nerve, which is kind of has a lot to do with our rest and, our parasympathetic nervous system. So rest and rejuvenation and tend and befriend and sort of, recuperate and heal. It's all of that. So things like meditation and deep breathing, activate that. And our sympathetic nervous system that's in the zone when we are reactive and under threat. Now we need that, right? We do need it. It's always a dynamic balance between the two. It's just if you're sitting at the dinner table, do you need to be in fight or flight? Probably not,
Yeah, hopefully not. And if so, that would be
even if you're doing something as simple as noticing your breathing when someone says something that you see as criticism, just notice that you probably can't breathe and to just take one breath, or to look at the sky, or just anything that just breaks that reactive mode and gives that tiny little pause for you to get into the responsive mode.
Okay, that's a good tip. Well, let's talk about criticism as one of these toxic behaviors and get into that a little bit. It would be, I think, interesting. We all have an idea what criticism feels like. That's for sure. Maybe we're a little bit less aware of when we're doing it. We might think, oh, but our good intentions, it doesn't hit the other person like criticism. So maybe you could start by just giving us a really basic framework around what this behavior looks like, kind of,
So criticism is it's really a complaint, okay, from someone else or from you, but let's talk about when it's coming from someone else. Someone is complaining, and it's the best way to just think of it is it's an unskillful complaint about something that they really care about, or it's an skillful attempt to give you feedback. Now, complaints,
because that takes the malice out of it.
Right? Yeah, complaints are normal. Like I said, we are going to complain all the time. It's healthy. It's part of just being different types of people in the world. The unskillful piece comes in. So it's useful, remember, it's about feedback and it's about complaining about something that the other really cares about. But it's unskillful. And it's unskillful because they're delivering it not just as a complaint about something or about your behavior, but it's got a whole lot of negative words about your character or your personality. Right? So there's an attack about you.
Right.
And that's
unskillful.
And that's part of the unskillful. So to unpack it, you want to unpack it into a complaint. It's an unskillful complaint. But the add-on are these critical words, these negative things about you that are added on, or that we are saying to other people that are added on.
Right. And that's almost like a judgment in a way, making it personal and judging the other person's maybe intent or capacity in the midst of the criticism.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that to respond to that, if it's happening to you, the very first thing you can do is just notice the impact that has on you, right? So like I said about the react respond, because it's going to hurt. Sometimes it's like being punched in the stomach, right? When someone criticizes you. But then start noticing that they're trying to say something. They're trying to complain about something. Either something that you've done or something that's going on in the situation, and they're just doing it really badly. So the best,
It's
the best
helpful to
thing to
think about
do.
it. I can see how helpful it is just to think about it that way, because it makes it impersonal a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, and there's a huge difference between complaint and criticism, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference. So what we want to do when we're facing that is turn criticism back into a complaint. So the trick is, and this is why you need to be feeling slightly calm, is to start asking questions for clarity, so that you can understand what the other person is trying to say with the criticism.
Sure. And that can be hard to not react to the perceived attack, or real attack maybe, in some ways through the words, to take that space and step back. So that's where some of these neutralizing mechanisms come in, of deep breath, or that you were saying, doing like a minute, just a moment meditation kind of thing, to be able to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a great example is on the computer with emails, right? Or on social media. That's a really good place to practice the pause.
Okay.
Because the pause allows you to suddenly go, oh, this is actually an unskillful complaint. What can I do? I could ask a question to ask more information. And, so think about when social media started and we just used to flame back an email rant, or you still see it on social media, immediate. Right. So when we're online and when we by email, just don't respond. If you notice that emotional response, don't, just wait. And then you'll know. I mean, I think most of us are doing that. We will then either not even respond, or we'll be more skillful. In the moment, if it's happening at the dinner table, is breath, right? Is breath, or to take another bite of food and get that down your throat. And so that is, honestly, in coaching, this is where we spend a lot of time, is inserting the pause moment between your reaction and your response. Because like you say, it's not easy.
Sure.
We judge immediately, and we're wired to just get that immediate. I mean, our survival brain is wired. We're hot-wired to react.
That makes sense. Yeah. I have a question there for you. I don't know if those who are watching live, again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. And if you're watching on replay, you can leave a comment as well. We can get back to those in writing. But I'm thinking, it seems like that is a great skill or way to react when you have someone that maybe says something offhanded, or it's not in their character to consistently come for you and attack you with criticism. What happens when you have someone in your family or a relationship, again, that is one of those permanent ones that they're going to be around in our lives, who just consistently is critical as almost their way of relating to you on a day-to-day basis? Do these tools still work, or at what point do boundaries or other topics come in that we would need to look for a different kind of reaction?
Yeah, so I would suggest that to practice neutralizing over and over again, right? So practice starting to ask questions, starting to understand where the other person is coming from. It neutralizes criticism. Okay. And that has a spiral on effect on the relationship going forward, because suddenly you're going from, let's say, one negative interaction, which has massive impact, to possibly one negative and one positive interaction. And so the relationship starts to shift. And remember that the person, it's an unskillful complaint. So the minute they realize they're being heard, because you're asking for more information, right? And you're asking for more clarity, and you're not attacking them back. It neutralizes it. I mean, it's like magic. And I know you're all probably going, yeah, right, that's not going to work. I promise you. This is my bugbear, so I know it works, all right?
Right.
But there are some other tips and tricks, right? You could don't don't ever criticize back and say you.
Mm-hmm.
Use the words, instead of saying you doing this, just that I feel this. So you can yourself respond to a complaint in a non-blame complaint way. So not to escalate it. But to get to your story, your thing on boundaries, and I have very different views on boundaries, right? My advice is to have as few boundaries as possible and keep your boundaries to your physical safety. And if you can't do that, if you need many more, then you need to come and talk to us about coaching.
Yeah, we've talked about that in another conversation.
Yeah.
And
we
that's
had that
interesting.
conversation. Yeah,
We may have to talk about that in another one though, because it is interesting the way you look at that. We may not have time today to get into it, but that is a good one, a very good one.
And it's useful. We can talk about this in other sessions about power, right? Because when there's a toxic behavior, we suddenly take up, we're either in a position of power or we're feeling powerless. And then we all react because we're feeling powerless. And that whole victim persecutor triangle starts. So you then victimize or you persecute the other person. And so there's just this ongoing thing. And so the trick is to really, really find out what's going on around that complaint. So to ask the questions. And if someone's consistently like that, you will also just realize they are so unskilled at complaining about something, and that just your asking for more information is growing their skill, because what they're needing to learn is how to make a skillful request.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You're actually training them as you opt out of falling into a different toxic behavior to respond to the criticism, like you said, defensiveness, blame, contempt even, by stepping back and using empathy to ask a question, or compassion to understand where they're coming from. It trains the other person in a way to then become more skillful, like you're saying, to make a request of what they really want or need.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, we're training them without them realizing. But, that's what I say. That's what neutralizes that toxic behavior, is just digging a little bit deeper. And if you are feeling all those feelings, the emotions, and your body's feeling out of control, but you have to sit where you're sitting because you're at the dinner table, see if you could just drop into something simple as, can you tell me a little bit more? So not even trying to be too smart about, you're trying to teach them about a skillful request or anything like that. Because the reason why you're picking it up as toxic behavior, because you are being triggered, because someone else might not be. So, so you are you need to be loving yourself first. So if all you can get out is, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more?
Yeah. Oh, I can see how disarming that would be.
Yeah.
In a very good way. All right, let's shift the conversation a little bit in the direction of what happens and what are your tips and recommendations for when we are the ones being critical. Because I'm sure, again, whether we're listening live or people are catching the replay, and no matter how enlightened and evolved we are, there are moments when we're going to fall into these toxic behaviors. I'm sure every one of us in one situation or another, as much as we want to avoid them. So how can we identify that within ourselves? How can we understand ourselves better so that we're showing up less and less with these kind of toxic behaviors, especially criticism, since that's our topic today?
Yeah, so there's some actions, really basic actions that I'll talk to now, because those will be useful. Like I said, actions. But the deeper thing is we want to start understanding what are the afflictive emotions that are driving that behavior. Okay. And so we can look at those, those afflictive emotions, whether it's anger or jealousy, and that would be work that we do in coaching. And then even more than that, we would then start looking at where do those emotions actually come from? and start looking at that and working with that. But for today is, again, if you are brave enough to admit that sometimes you do it, got to remember that that you're doing an unskillful complaint, one portion, and the other portion is you actually are attacking the other person's personality. So what you want to do is split them off. So stop saying you make me crazy, you shouldn't say this, you should have packed the dishwasher, bloody idiot because you didn't pack the dishwasher, whatever. Take the you out of it, right?
Right.
And start practicing the complaint bit. How to make a better complaint, how to skillfully complain, which is how to make a skillful request. Now, there's a couple of components in making a skillful request, but the key one is start with please. That helps.
Sure, that it does. Yep. Basic stuff. Sometimes the most profound solutions are the most basic things that we just forget to do consistently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the trick is to be really specific. So, please would you pack the dishwasher by 8 o'clock this evening before everyone leaves? And then you have to wait for their agreement. Because a skillful request, right, is not a request until they've agreed.
Makes sense.
Because that's what makes us so mad so much, right? We put out, especially as women, we put out these sort of subtle requests that are not very clear. And then we get mad.
Then the other side is the ultimatum, which is also not a skillful request, I imagine.
No.
Yes.
And ultimatums and boundaries are things you have to follow up on. So an ultimatum, if you're giving someone an ultimatum, like if you do this, I'm going to do X, then you're going to have to do it. And do you really want to do it?
Right. Yeah, it can become a tool for almost control, because I hear in a lot of things you're saying that there is somewhere in there within criticism a root of control, either the outcome that you want or the behavior of the person or your own, like you're saying, like a boundary that's almost so rigid that it's missing some heart to it or soul to it.
And I think this is where we get into trouble all the time, right? Is this dynamic of power and powerlessness. It's about control.
Yeah.
And we're just so not taught relationship skills. We're not taught to look after our emotions as a sovereign human being. And so we're always giving our power of our emotions out to someone else. He makes me crazy. How does he do that? He doesn't. You make you crazy.
Yeah. That could be a hard truth to hear if you haven't been in this world kind of self-development or around a lot of life coaches. The first time you hear that, it's like, but what do you mean? But when you get into it, there's so much power and personal power, and just realizing how much we can really define our own happiness and our own well-being when we start to take such total responsibility for our inner world and the way we show up with the outer world too. At least that's been my personal process as I'm on my own journey here of growth. I think it's a really hard pill to swallow at first, but beautiful once you get it down.
Well, once you figure out how to do it, and that's often where, people, because we're not taught any of this, right? And you can pick it up now, and there's way more self-help books than there ever were. Yeah. But it's consistently working with our socialization and our wiring and the play between our cognitive brain, our executive brain here, and our primitive brain, so it's showing up for yourself every day, So these little tips that I've given you are actually really quite easy.
Yeah.
This
is what I love.
They're on the action, and I can promise you, will not believe the difference they make in one interaction, as crazy as it sounds. Yeah.
It's tremendously encouraging, really, to think that just a little bit of awareness and a little bit of shift in ourselves can cause such different results in our outer world and our relationships. And I think that's one thing that just continually draws me back to coaching and the coaching model in terms of self development, is because it's not prescriptive. You're not telling people what to do. You're helping people to understand themselves better and giving them some new principles and guidelines to show up in our lives in different ways, which I personally really love.
There's a great comment that's just come in here.
Okay.
There's what you can control from Teachable Moments Financial. What you can control: actions, reactions, and mindset. What you can't control: everything else.
Yep. That's true. Thank you, John.
But boy, we want to. We really want to.
Yeah. And then John's a coach too. He's a financial coach, so he also is right in this kind of line of thinking, which is cool. Thank you for that, John. That's good. Well, I know we wanted to keep this to about half an hour, since we are going to go live every day, and we don't want to go too much in depth, so we can save stuff to talk about tomorrow. But for those of you that don't know, we have a group coaching program with Julia precisely around this topic of how to manage relationships, and we're doing it through the holiday season, so you can have some hand holding to actually begin to practice some of this stuff, put it into place, and get feedback, live feedback along the way. You can sense just from listening to Julia your absolute expertise and skillfulness in this topic. So there's so much to learn and grow from. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that program is going to feel like for those that haven't done either coaching at all or a group coaching kind of format. I think it'd be interesting to explain that to them. And I'm hoping for those that have chimed in here, connected and listened, you can feel, if you've ever had that question, what's the difference between like therapy and coaching? I think you can feel that when you listen to Julia explain the approach of how she comes at this topic of, criticism, toxic behaviors. It's not looking back necessarily at the roots, it's looking forward and looking at your thoughts and emotions to become, as opposed to focusing on the past to kind of pull up all those things. I didn't want to say that, but I'll pass it to you so you can explain a little bit more about what the program looks like.
Yeah, so it's a 2-month program. So Janie, and we're going to actually start next week. Right. And the idea of doing it over the holidays is exactly because this is the time when we have all this material to learn from. It's about the best possible time. So in the first month, I'm going to have you all as highly reactive kind of little beings, and we're going to play with that, right? We're going to explore what it means to put the gap between react and respond right in the moment, okay? You've got your Christmas dinner, or, you've got all these different social events going on, so we can practice it in the moment, and I'm going to be there. We'll be coaching every week, so we can actually bring the examples and coach them every week. But we're also going to have a 24/7, call it 24/7 WhatsApp group between us, because it's a small group of us women. So the idea is that, in the moment you're at something and you're going to send a message to the group, and the group can support you on that and bring the learnings to life. So it's a slightly different, because we actually got the material in front of us and it's hot now. Right. So we walk through that in December. And then what we then do, and of course I'm giving you tips, real life tips as we go, but I'm starting to look a little deeper already, okay, to really show you what the future looks like, and where ultimately you bring your power back to you, so that none of this relationship stuff ever bothers you ever again. So I can promise you that. And then in January, we start looking at some of the real core concepts that will shift your mindset. And the one thing that I'm really passionate about is is something called the self-coaching, or how to coach yourself. And I talk about that on the Happiness Matters podcast a lot, because you want to be able to sustain this going forward, right? You can't hang on to a coach for the rest of your life. Right. And so I teach you the basic tools in how to start coaching yourself, so then you go forward from there. So that's pretty much what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And there's
Amy will be with us as well, so it's a fun.
I will. I'm there to learn and share, and there's always so much to learn. This network of coaches within Lemon Rebellion is so precious and dear to me, because literally I'm just so happy to be able to like chat with you guys and learn from you all. And I really believe in this coaching model because I've gone through it as well. How transformative it can be, and it's a beautiful thing, especially from these holistic perspectives that bring in the full self, the whole being happiness, because we're much more than just one simple aspect, right, to who we are and our well-being. So I love that, and I'm excited about this program. So if you guys have listened until now, thank you. I know we've seen Lisa and John and Paula and Diego and some others have come in and out throughout the call. Thank you for showing up and listening and for catching the replay. Those of you that are watching this on IGTV or on Facebook or on YouTube, because we're going to put it everywhere. This program, Make It Through the Holidays, focused on relationships, starts next Tuesday, December 8th. Is that a Tuesday or Wednesday?
Wednesday is the 8th,
Wednesday.
yeah.
All right, so we're starting next Wednesday, and again, we're going live every day now through Monday to talk about one of these 4 toxic behaviors in relationships, just as a build-up to kind of get you feeling what are some of the things we're going to be talking about and working on, like you said, hot, live, in real life with our family relationships through the holidays. And it's going to be a really awesome program. You can see hanging out with Julia and working with Julia is an absolute pleasure. So we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place, and we'll get tomorrow. What are we talking about? We are talking about blame, right?
I think tomorrow we'll talk about defensiveness, actually.
Okay, all right. Tomorrow, defensiveness.
And we do a lot of that because it's the other side of criticism and blame, right?
Yep.
Someone criticizes you, we go immediately into defensiveness.
Oh, yes, we do. We'll have a lot of good things to talk about there. So, all right, everyone, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you tomorrow to talk about defensiveness. Bye, Julia. Good to see you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Hey, everybody. Happy Saturday. I'm going to be talking with Julia Seal again today. We've got this 4-day series on toxic behaviors that create and escalate conflict in relationships. And this topic is really interesting because we certainly all have lots to learn from it. There's Julia. Bring her on. Let's see, I think, how do I get you in here, friend? Sometimes this takes me a minute. There we go. Yesterday we talked about criticism and blame, and today we're going to be chatting about the flip side of those two things, which is defensiveness. There she is. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
Happy Saturday.
Yeah, and you too. And we both look like we've been exercising.
I have been. Have you?
I've been in the garden, so I quickly did like a wash and
That's lovely. That's awesome. I got a quick spin in on my wheels, but I'm going to go out again after our live, so I didn't bother changing because I'm going right back out there to do it again.
Right, can you see me? Because I'm in a slightly different place today.
Yeah, all good. All good.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about defensiveness. Yeah.
More fun stuff. I hope people enjoyed the criticism piece yesterday.
Yeah. I had a couple people reach out personally and send me some messages about how useful it was for them, and how this term of unskilled, an unskillful request, plus this kind of judgment on character is what makes the criticism so ineffective. And I just wanted to let you know, people thought that was a really helpful way to dissect what criticism is. They get their head around, okay, how can I do this in a different way?
Yeah, because, sometimes we do have to dissect it afterwards. It's quite amazing to be able to do it in the moment. So we've got to practice some of the stuff afterwards, even if we've had an explosion with someone, is to go back and dissect it and to pick out and see what you're looking for. And then, the more you are familiar with the tools, the more you're familiar with your own response, then you can start acting in the moment, right? Yeah.
Yep. Self-awareness. And then you were also talking yesterday a lot about the difference between react and respond. I thought that might be interesting to just go over that. If you haven't watched the video from yesterday, it's on criticism. It's on our IGTV or wherever you're watching this. You can find another link to the other video. Today's defensiveness, but this topic of react and respond, could you give us a little recap on that? Because I think it's so important to make sure everybody has this concept kind of clear.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really where we want to get to. The whole idea about how to neutralize conflict, how to reduce its impact on us and on others is for a different kind of response to our normal automatic response, because the automatic response is the reaction, the one that we're wired for. Now that wiring is carried, through from childhood, what we experienced in our family groups. And it's, like I said yesterday, hot-wired into our system, as well as even hot-wired into our primitive brain in terms of, the fight or flight reaction. So, the whole art of this, and I think this is the wonderful thing about life and whole being, is it is an art and a science to how do we shift ourselves from that really reactive space into the responsive space. And I think, we spoke a lot yesterday about some of
You almost said last week.
last week, like yesterday. So if people are watching this and they haven't seen the first video, even if you just jump in and watch the beginning, then there's a lot more on, the react and the respond piece. But, one of the tools I offered yesterday was something like breath to help you just create that pause between your automatic response. And one of the things I said is I take my pulse, right? Just as a way of calming myself down. I just go, I'm literally sitting there at the table and I can feel my pulse racing. Something else I want to offer people today is if you are feeling yourself triggered and that rush of heat or that breathlessness is something you can do to calm the vagus nerve, which we spoke about, it's literally, and no one will see what you're doing, right? Is to just stroke your ear around the edges of your ears like this, right? And here, and if necessary, this is also wakes up the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is your rest and rejuvenate of the parasympathetic nervous system. So anything you can do, and people won't really notice if you're doing that. If you're feeling triggered by what's going on, just give yourself a little bit of help. And the minute you start doing that, right, so you're doing a physical thing, which is actually having an impact. But what you're also doing is you've become aware of what's going on. And that awareness is the most special thing, because that's your insert into between react and respond. So the minute you suddenly remember, Julia said I should stroke my ears, you're there, right?
I mean, it sounds weird as hell, but like it's, in a way, you're conditioning yourself, right? You're giving yourself this, like, okay, when I do this, I mean, I know it has its own biological kind of impact, but also you're just buying that time to be able to respond and not react. Okay.
Yeah, because you're using both wisdom, right? You're using your cognitive wisdom, which is to remember this conversation, and then the somatic wisdom, which is, like you say, the biological response is going to work already. So any little tool that you have, and lots of people say that, breathe and count to 3. Well, they don't say that for no good reason.
Yeah,
so, that's kind of react and respond in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, good. No, I thought that was important to start out reminding ourselves about that today. So yesterday you wound up our conversation saying, all right, we talked about criticism. We went into depth a bit about how it shows up, why it shows up, the root of it, these issues of power, powerlessness, and control. And then you said today, when we talk about defensiveness, this is the flip side. So how is it linked? How are these two things of blame and criticism linked to defensiveness?
So Jamie, and I think that's quite, I think it's really good to just picture it as defensiveness and criticism and blame come together, right?
Okay.
It's two sides of the same coin. So they are really related. So in that interaction, one person is doing the blaming and the criticizing, and one is in a defensive space. So that's the two sides of the coin. So you're always going to have the two, right? If the conflict is, or the negative conflict, because we spoke about healthy conflict yesterday too, but there's always going to be these two players, victim, persecutor, player, all the time, between criticism and defensiveness. So the interesting thing about it being defensiveness, especially people that feel a lot of criticism, it's very noble, right? I'm just being I'm defensive, right? I'm protecting myself. So, and it's a completely natural response if you're suffering a personal attack. You know, it's an understandable response. But it's a very interesting thing because we feel quite noble when we're doing it, like I'm just defending myself. But it's actually the flip side of blame, because what you're saying in that interaction, no, it's not me, it's actually you.
Without saying it. You're saying it without saying it, because you're not acknowledging
doing exactly the same.
The unskillful complaint. Yeah, okay.
You're putting it straight back on the other person. I'm just defending myself. Yeah.
And then that completely shuts down communication because neither side has understood the requests of the other.
Exactly. And so the whole thing about that defensiveness space that you get into is, you know, you're basically just contributing to the problem, and it escalates the conflict because there is just lack of clarity on both sides, and it's just going backwards and forwards like that. So, you know, for those of you who are, and I think a lot of women tend to see themselves as more defensive, as opposed to, you know, we actually don't like to admit that we might be doing the criticism.
Yeah, I think we do too, though. Yeah.
You know, but we're far more subtle, right? Because, but it's not me, it's you. So I think it's really important. So if we start with, if you're doing it and you notice that you're being defensive, the first thing you're going to notice is the exact same thing that if you're experiencing criticism, right? You're going to feel that pinch. And that's your flag that something is going on. Something in the dynamic between the two of you, but also something in yourself. You know, you're being triggered by what's going on. So manage that, hold on to that. So notice that, and then see what is your next, you know, your next move in that split second is you're not above the conflict. By being defensive, you're contributing to this unhealthy conflict.
Which is different than being noble and trying to stay out, but interesting. So, good thing.
Kind of like passive aggressive, I guess. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't really know the full thing of passive aggressiveness, but it kind of looks like that. So what you really want to do is admit to yourself, if you're feeling defensive, that I'm not above this conflict situation. I'm actually contributing to it just by me feeling like this person's criticizing me and she's to blame, and it's got nothing to do with me. So first of all, take a piece of responsibility for it in yourself, just for your whole experience. And then we go back to the same thing with criticism, right? Is ask for clarity. So what do you mean when you say this? Because remember, when you're receiving the criticism, you're getting the unskillful comment or the unskillful request, and then the negative things about you personally. So the trick is to manage yourself internally with that personal stuff, because that's going to bite. Right. So you're going to breathe into that. You're going to be rubbing your ears, and then you're going to look at the unskillful piece and start asking questions for clarity again. Right. And then the other thing that's a little bit harder for us all to accept is, can we be big enough to look for the 2% truth in what the other person is saying?
Why do you say 2%? Yeah.
Because there is a piece, the reason the conflict is there is a dynamic between the two of you. So there's some truth in what the other person is saying, They're saying remember, they're trying to give you feedback. They're trying to comment about something that they care about deeply. They're just doing it unskillfully. So you want to hear what it is that they're trying to say about what you did or what's going on. And the reason we say 2%, okay, is because that's just enough to crack open our little brain to say, maybe there is something I'm doing here. What can I do?
And because
so it's 50%, it's just a 2%.
Got you.
Yeah.
And because it's an unskillful request, you're probably getting more information than what the 98% of it may be fluff, maybe be distraction, or things that are not really focused specifically on what the other person really wants to resolve, because like you said, they're not skilled yet at expressing it in a way that would be clear or to the point or easy to understand, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely hard in any of this unhealthy, toxic conflict for us to own any part of it, right? We have to be bigger than our little selves, right? We have to step into saying, intentionally, I do actually want a better dynamic between this person and me.
Yeah.
And so that is always going to be, we're in a relationship, right? So we're in it together. It's never just one person's fault.
Right. Always takes two to tango.
Yeah, not even necessarily, two to tango almost implies 50-50, right? Because two are in the dance together. But in this blame and the defensiveness dynamic, look for the 2%. And that is enough for you to own enough so that you can hear the other person. And if the other person starts to hear that they're being heard, not just having blame thrown back at them, then the whole thing softens. And what you're looking for is that slight softening. Yeah.
That's good. Good. I want to say here to the people that are joining us live, if you have any questions, feedback about what we're talking about, throw those things in the comment. We're super happy to address them. And if you're watching a replay, leave a comment as well, and we'll go back through those later and respond in writing. But I'm curious, Julia, are there types of, we all have our personalities, extroverted, introverted, highly sensitive, empathic or not, or more alpha kind of person. What kind of people tend to be or feel this defensiveness or fall into the defensiveness kind of toxic reaction, maybe more than others? Is there a certain set of characteristics that make us more likely to fall kind of into that pattern?
I think it's got to do again with what we spoke about yesterday around power and powerlessness. So you can often see this type of behavior in the workplace where there's roles and power. And so someone considers, they see themselves as smaller or less than. We're not talking about physical violence here, right? Or domestic violence.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all. Right.
This is dynamics between people and the grrr that happens between us that's unhealthy, and that we want to shift into healthy situation. But you find that criticism and defensiveness dynamic is always to do with I'm feeling powerlessness or powerless, and I think the other person has power. So that is what we always look for in coaching, is to bring us back into our inner power and to take it back, because when we're in defensive mode, it's out there in the hands of someone else.
Interesting.
And so we need to understand, what is it about you or me that has created that particular wiring or neurological pattern that we feel powerless in this kind of situation. So I can give you two really interesting examples, and if people want to put examples in the comments, it's very interesting here. I coach academics, right? And one of the almost the common themes are, one of the big themes I see a lot. So let's say like a black woman she's high academic, right? She's top of her field, and she's interacting with white men. And because of South Africa's history, there is a perceived powerlessness, but it's also a particular dynamic around white academic men the way they're scientific, right? And the way they argue at a point. And they're very robust in their conversations. But we take it, women often take it as criticism. Very fascinating, right? And then we've got this extra layer in South Africa of our history. So there's that extra layer of the perceived powerlessness. So a lot of coaching that I'm doing is allowing these women to just step into their own power, because the guy that she's sitting opposite is not intentionally using power against her on purpose. This is a robust conversation, as for example, or they are debating a scientific point. And what happens to these amazing, powerful women is they go, or even in the boardroom, right? They just go quiet. They don't say anything. So, that is about power and dynamic, and just really finding your inner power, because then it doesn't matter what's going on around you. Even if it's just, like I say, scientific debate, which is healthy conflict versus unhealthy conflict.
Sure.
But we're talking about the unhealthy conflict, and how do we own what's going on there and become powerful in that. So, and to use an example of where does it come from and how does it show up. Here's a great example from my own life, if people don't mind me using it, is, in my family background, we had quite a lot of, conflict, all right? And I don't even know if it was unhealthy conflict. I was quite young, but nothing was really ever resolved and was always put under the carpet. And so I developed this particularly strange pattern of really didn't like criticism. So my pattern is criticism and defensiveness. So then I marry someone, right, who's a scientist, and he's Scottish, and he loves robust debate and comments, and he's very, he's got a lot to say about the world, right? And so when we're having a conversation, he's excited and he's talking on and he's like raises his voice and he gets excited, and boom, I get triggered, right? Because I think there's criticism there. So in the beginning, I would be like, this, I felt as triggered as a little girl, right? So powerless, small, wanting to burst into tears. And then I would react, right, with whatever reaction, or like, you're just blaming me for this, and no, and it's like, I haven't done anything wrong. And he would go, what are you talking about? This is nothing about you. This is about the telephone system or the fish pond. It's got nothing to do with you at all. And I was just taking it all personally, because that is my wiring. And so the minute I kind of realized, oh boy, here's this old patterning that was laid down from a family dynamic, and it's showing up again and again. Like I said, the same people show up again to teach us things. The same pattern keeps coming up. And the minute you see it, that's the magic, right? Because then you can interrupt it. Even though you might still get triggered, because that's your fight or flight response coming in. But you can catch it before it's flared straight out, and literally I'm having a tantrum and throwing my toys,
Yeah. I have a question for you about this, because I think that my own patterning is also somewhere between criticism and defensiveness. And one thing I personally, when I look back in the past, one thing I personally see myself doing is wanting to explain the context. So you get a criticism, maybe even I somehow skillfully acknowledge the criticism and look for the root. And if I've done that, I still want to explain, okay, but this is the context in which this thing that you're criticizing me for happened, so that it's almost like a humanizing a bit. I want some empathy so they can see that there was not a bad intent, or that it was not a failure of whatever the judgment I want to avoid may be. Where does that fall? And normally I ask you questions that I think I have an idea about the answer to make sure I don't make myself look bad. This one I don't. I'm just genuinely curious. Where does that fall?
Yeah, there's something about a coach telling stories about her life that people go, and she's going to coach me? Like, really?
Well, I'm not coaching, so I can say my things. You're the coach.
And me as well, right? Like,
no, but
all the deep, dark secrets,
Yeah, but also I think I think it's good for people to know. I mean, as much as you know, as far along as you may be in your personal development journey, there's always something to learn. There's always something to grow. And something can happen and we fall back into a pattern that we had been over for 10, 20 years, and suddenly we find ourselves in it because something snapped us back to it. Maybe it wasn't fully healed. So I asked that question because I wonder, is that still defensiveness? Is that an inappropriate thing to do, is to give context after you've acknowledged the other person? Is that also kind of not
I
really
would be
helpful?
I would actually be asking yourself why, what is beneath your need to justify?
To not be
are you thinking they're actually hearing you? And are you being clear?
Yeah. Okay.
There's something there that's kind of, they're misunderstanding it, so they're judging me, and I would possibly be working with you. Well, what does it matter, Jamie?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And working on that inner solid core of actually, if you're sovereign and you fully own your emotional experience, they just need to know the facts, and they get to think whatever they're going to think about you, and it actually doesn't need to bother you. Mm-hmm. So that all that justifying and all that thing is partly a powerlessness of you wanting other people to feel, or kind of to like you, so that you feel good about yourself. There, I'm just putting it out there, right? I don't know, because we have
probably
could be.
Probably very true. Yeah.
And I would just watch yourself in that need to justify. To sort of ask them what, it's about asking them what is their complaint actually about, and then what's the 2% truth, and then acknowledging that 2% truth, even if you can only acknowledge yourself in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That is helpful. Well, tell us some other ways that defensiveness shows up. Are there ways that it shows up secretly that we might not be naming as defensiveness, and it is defensiveness? How can we keep an eye out for it?
Sorry, say that again. How can we
keep an eye out for defensiveness in the various ways that it shows up, either through our own behavior or in others?
Well, I think you're going to notice it the word to use is if it pinches you or sucker punches you. Because if it's showing up somewhere else and you're not reacting to it, then it's not toxic conflict, right? It's only toxic conflict when you're getting triggered and you're letting yourself get into reactive mode. So you will know when something is your body will tell you when something has had an impact on you. So, I do want to warn, and before we finish, I want to talk about, if you're someone that actually does this too. If you're someone, what to do if you're experiencing someone in a defensive mode, because that's also useful, right? But what I really want to caution about is, let's also be careful when we're having a conversation with someone of name calling, right? Of immediately saying that's criticism and blame. Well, that's defensiveness. Be careful of that, because the more we box people and we box behaviors and we sort of try and define them and make others wrong, we tighten everything, okay? And we kind of solidify the problem instead of that curiosity of I want to open this up. I want to let a bit of light in, a little bit of love, a little bit of something to just ease this up. So be mindful of your own inbuilt filtering system. Like my example from my own life with my husband, right? There's no criticism there. It was my wiring, my built-in filtering system, that part of my brain that's filtering all the stuff coming in, was filtering that as a threat. And so that's what you've got to work with, is what are you letting in, and what are you naming it as? To be careful, to not every person that criticizes you is doing toxic criticism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not every time you experience someone being defensive is it toxic, right? It's only toxic when it escalates. So, to all the people out there and who are experiencing defensive people.
Hey everyone, I'm really sorry about that. I got kicked off over here with a weird internet thing that happened. So I apologize because that means that Julia and I think got stopped right in the middle of the call. So we're gonna invite Julia on and finish the conversation. I apologize. That was definitely the interwebs on my side of the world over here. Hey Julia, I'm so sorry. Something happened on my side here with the internet.
Well, I just assumed it was my fault, right? Because we have these crazy internet lines and power cuts. And so I just thought, well, I'll carry on talking and finish what I'm saying in case they are still listening.
Good. I don't know. I didn't get to see the recording. I don't know if it recorded or not, that last little bit, since I got kicked off, but I do apologize. It was my internet on the side. Sorry, everyone. Thanks for coming back in. For those that are watching live, thanks for joining again. The last thing I heard, at least, you were you were talking about defensiveness, but I don't know which exact point.
No, I think we were talking a little bit about if you're experiencing other people's defensiveness, right? So if I repeat myself, and I can see we've got some people joined again. If I'm repeating myself, then forgive me, but let me do it anyway for Jamie. So that she's wise and she knows how to use these awesome little tips and tricks. But so if you notice someone's being defensive, right? So it's not me, and it's like, but you did this and you did that, so it's coming straight back at you. Be the bigger person, right? And realize that what you have said has had an impact and they are feeling personally criticized. So you be kind of, it's almost like look at yourself and see, has my complaint or my comment, my feedback been unskillful, and have I attacked them personally, attacked their personality? And even if you haven't, right? So even if they're being triggered because they've got like a family history of personal attacks, so any like the raised voice is a trigger for people.
Sure.
Soften it, right? And the way to soften it is to ask them, what did you understand what I just said? Or try and just say it in a different way, use different words.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's just the words that trigger people. And see if that, and then really listen. Really listen. And I think most people, I see this a lot in business. And when leaders, the feedback comes to leaders, right? They do a 360 review or whatever, and the feedback is, oh, you criticize people, and they're so devastated by the feedback. But it's like, and they're so willing to learn. So most of us, if we get told, oh, but you're criticizing people unhealthily, right? You're creating unhealthy conflict. They don't want to be doing it. So it might be that they are doing an unskillful request or unskillful feedback. And how do they learn to do that? And the one is to just keep saying it in a different way until the other person is no longer triggered by what you're saying and can hear it. Because you've got to listen for what you're trying to say, and are you saying it clearly? So that's really what I was saying before we got cut off.
Thank you for repeating it. And if you got to hear it twice because you watched the first half of the video and then this last little part, it's just repetition is good.
Oh, has my electricity gone off? Oh no.
It was me. I apologize. I know we wanted to keep it to about half an hour, so we can maybe do 5 more minutes or so since we had this tragic tech issue. One thing that we said we might talk about is, when you work with someone through coaching, how do you explore why defensiveness, for instance, or criticism and the other toxic behaviors that we'll talk about in the next 2 days, why are these even triggers for someone?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to do, so you kind of, when you threw that question out at me, when I, like, why do I just try to justify myself? The first thing the coach is going to ask you is, give me one specific example.
Yeah.
Because that's what we actually want to look at, because that's where we can start unpacking what's going on, is in a specific example, because we're great at generalizing as humans. You always do. My husband always does that. And so you can't, so you need the specifics exactly. And so when you start unpacking the specifics, then you can start seeing the different elements of it. And in fact, I recorded a podcast this morning on the Lego building blocks of your wiring patterns. And I think that one's going to release on, it's just before Christmas. I did it like as a Christmas present for everyone.
Nice.
But like, what are the building blocks of Lego building blocks of your inner wiring? And so that's what we would do. We'd start unpacking your actions, and then we'd start unpacking, well, what was driving those actions, or what emotion was driving those actions?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And then we'd start looking, well, what thoughts created those particular emotions? Because remember, emotions are the fuel.
Right.
They're our fuel, and we act based on that fuel. So but then obviously an emotion doesn't come from anywhere, right? It comes from our thoughts, even unconscious thinking, which would be our patterning, our old childhood patterning. And we don't even need to know. We don't need to go there, because what's showing up for you today will tell us what's going on. And we spoke a little bit about the difference between therapy and coaching. So, you and I, we don't need to go and look and spend years and years in your background, right? It's useful, and it helps you navigate your life to know. So I can talk to you about, my childhood or whatever. But all we're looking for is what in that particular situation was going on. And then we start coaching, right? So, and we usually don't coach actions. That, especially if you're coaching mindset or emotions, right? Actions is the very last thing you coach, because that's just tips and tools, that things like I'm giving you today, right? Little tricks and tips and habits that you can form. But we're not necessarily addressing what's going on emotionally. And we might be addressing a little bit of thought, because we've been, we're talking concepts, all right? So you might get this idea, oh, right, that's an unskillful complaint. And suddenly you have a different thought about that person.
Yes.
But we really want to unpack what's going on at that level. And it really is like playing Lego. I mean, it's so when we're in a coaching relationship, we'd be saying, well, if you're sitting next to this really difficult person and you usually are feeling edgy and anxious, what needs to happen for you to be feeling peaceful when you're sitting next to this person? Right. And then we're going to look at the building blocks around that. What might you need to be thinking in order to feel peaceful? Yeah. What would you be doing if you were peaceful? Can you do that? This whole acting as if until you're there. And so that's what you would start playing with. Yeah. So that's fun. That's really fun.
That is fun. I'd love, if you have a little bit of time, I'd love for you to explain to us, because a lot of us, we want to go straight into the action. We want to take the tip and we want to apply it. And then we find ourselves a month later in a similar situation, and we've lost the tip. We didn't get the behavior change to take the time to respond, to do the breath, to, what is the relationship between the actions, the feelings, and the thoughts, that instead of going in through the action that we want quick results, maybe we actually need to go in through one of these other doors? Would you like to maybe give us a little bit of insight into why that's important?
Yeah, so the best way to think about it is like, it's the magic formula to how we are, right? Thoughts, feelings, actions. It's basically, that's the truth of everything. So, and it's the interrelation between the three of them. So Dr. Aaron Beck, who actually died in November, he's the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. So he came up with the think, feel, act cycle. So it's literally saying, and it's like a triangle, think, feel, act, and they are in relationship to each other. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy forms a lot of, almost the entire base of coaching theory, right? Because, you know, thoughts, feelings, actions, and it's all about positive change going forward. So it's that interrelations. So he was literally saying, and he's done the most, his work is the base of all treatment for, you know, psychology treatments, not psychiatry treatments of depression, anxiety, bipolar, you know, nail biters, smokers, all kinds of things. So his work is really powerful. But he's basically saying they're interrelated. So you change one of those components, it will affect all the others. But what we know is that, we know that from studying what goes on in the minds of meditators, is everything starts with a thought. So the world is going on like around us, and we have 70,000 thoughts going through our mind. We're not actually thinking all 70,000 of them in a day. We're just picking a few to think. It's like going into the clouds and picking one thought to think, and we engage
attention.
And we give that attention, and we start the act of thinking. And the minute we think something, we start up a chain reaction in our brain, which is, and then in our bodies, and then it's a feedback loop. So we start off, we engage in thinking, we think something. So so-and-so said this to me, and I think, oh, what an idiot thought.
Sure.
And thoughts create emotion.
Right.
That's a proven process.
Yep.
So the thoughts are going on in here, the little wires are sparking, ding, 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 and chemicals are being pumped out, and they're washing into your body, and your body is feeling stuff.
Yeah.
And the information is coming back from your body up into your brain. So there's constant feedback loop.
Yeah.
So your thoughts create your emotions. Now your emotions fuel everything. They fuel whether you act or you don't act.
Right.
So it can be useful to try and practice a new skill, because that in itself already starts the pattern going, you're changing that component, but it is the hardest place to affect change from. The easiest place to affect change from is in your thinking, because then everything flows from there. And we can also work with emotions, but you need to be, that is something that I really love working with in coaching, is how to purposefully use our emotions, whether they feel good or they don't feel good.
Right.
Because they really are very powerful, but there's a skill there in order to be able to sit and hold in a difficult emotion, right? And to let it wash through your body, and what you do with it so that it washes through your cells and out of you. But if you, for us on this call today, we've been looking mostly at the actions, changing those little Lego bricks. And we've been talking about possible ways of thinking about things differently. And that's a beautiful place to start too. Very powerful,
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Well, to me it does. Ask questions in the comments. If it doesn't make sense to you, feel free to throw some stuff in there. But I love these kind of conversations, because it just gives you that perspective of not to over-identify with your thought or your emotion or even the action, that we can understand and kind of observe how it's all working together, and that's how we're creating and manifesting kind of in a non-magical way, I suppose, our realities from day to day. And I know, go ahead.
No, and if we can slow it down enough, so that question you asked me about judgment, we would slow it down and unpack it in a specific situation. And just the slowing down process creates this massive insight and the awareness. And like we were saying yesterday, awareness is the start of it all. If you know what you're doing and you know why you're doing it, then you're halfway there, right?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm excited about our group coaching program coming up around relationships. It starts next Wednesday. And I know we're going to do this at the end of every video of these 4 videos. Take a second and tell us a little bit about what that coaching program looks like. I think those that have joined us live or are catching a replay are getting a little bit of a feeling of, okay, how a coaching session might go, a group coaching experience might go. What can they expect if they say, I want to get into these topics more. I want to learn how to think, how to observe my feelings, thoughts, and then create actions that are going to help me have more fulfilling, satisfying relationships. The holidays are coming up. It's inevitably a time when we are face to face with all the good, the bad, and the ugly of our family relationships, maybe more than usual. So tell us a little bit about what's coming up with this program.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to be together for 8 weeks in a small group. And the idea is to really use the holidays for all the examples that we want. So we're going to be looking for all the triggers that show up for you. And we might even, if, you know, specifically you might have one relationship that you want to improve over the period, or it's just a general sense of, you know, my relationships need a reset, right? We're now 2 years into COVID. I need to reset my emotions. But in the beginning, we're looking for triggers. And so that's where we're going to coach together over the holiday season, is on your triggers. So a lot of what we're talking about today, which is on the action level, we'll also look at what's called the kind of the afflictive emotions that drive a lot of these behaviors, and what shows up, like what is your dominant one. It might be anger, it might be envy, might be pride, all those things we don't want to hear about. And then so we're starting to unpack that and get ideas of and learn about ourselves and create awareness in the first month using what's going on in the holiday season. And then we'll all settle down a bit in January to be able to step back one step and start looking at those patterns and figuring out your exact patterns, because when you know your pattern, you know how to change it and you can see yourself in it. It's quite fun, really. I think in a live ages ago, you and I talked about the game board or gamifying your life. And that's what it's like, right? When you start seeing your patterns and you just go, or even your friends or even your family, you just like, there I go again. I did it again, which brings such lightness to it. Because, you know, what we're not trying to do, Janie, is make anything about ourselves wrong. Okay, this, you know, coaching's not about like, there's something wrong with me and I need to fix it. I think this is one of the big messages that comes often in the self-help field, right? Is there something wrong with you? And in order to be whole and in order to be wanted and liked and have love and be successful, need to fix these things. So people that attack personal development with a vengeance are actually trying they think they are not whole, they think they are not okay. And that's what we're never saying, right? We're all worthy and we're all perfect. But we want to be like, we want whole being happiness. We want to feel that in all the areas of our life. We want to feel the softening in all areas of our life. So we need to go to the places that are difficult. And so this is what
you always say that. You always say that. I love it. The treasure.
But, you know, it's not about like we're going to go, you know, a lot of people go, does that mean I'm going to go and have to have all these horrible conversations with people now? It's not, right? We're going to work with you. And so, and your relationships will shift. I mean, this is the fascinating thing about relationships, right? Is one tiny thing shifts in you, everything shifts, because everything's so connected. It's a system. You're into systems thinking, right? So we don't need to have these deep conversations with our loved ones about when you said that you really hurt me, or I've got to pluck up the courage to have that conversation. If that's what you want to do, once we've cleared out the triggering out of your system, that's really different. But we're going to get you to a clean place, or an emotionally clear, neutral place. And then you act from there. You don't act from feeling defensive. You don't act from feeling angry. You know, it's like if you're going to want to do an intervention in a relationship, we're going to get you to a point of neutrality. But so don't be put off by me saying, listen, we go to the hard places. It's not hard. Coaching is fun, right?
Yeah, totally fun.
and insightful, you know, and usually you end a coaching session going, wow.
I'm feeling energized because you're always learning something about yourself and understanding dynamics and feeling more empowered, more sovereign, more connected, you know, in a way that you're defining how your life is going forward. And I think it's really exciting too. But I do geek out about these things. I'm super excited about your program coming up next week because yeah, these are things that we all can learn from and grow from. There's always something to yeah, to just continue shining light into and to learn and grow. So I'm super excited about that.
It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Yeah.
Awesome.
It'll be good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I want to thank you for hanging out with me again today. I'm just thrilled as can be that I get to talk with you every day.
I know, it's fun, isn't it?
These mornings in a row. And thank you. I know I saw Candace and Jenny, and I saw Paola and a couple other people come in. Thanks for watching live. And if you're catching the replay, thanks for catching the replay. We're coming back tomorrow again, 11 a.m. What's our topic for tomorrow, Julia?
I think we are talking tomorrow about sulking. And what we call stonewalling, which is the cold shoulder, right? Like you give people the cold shoulder. So,
oh, and those two, okay, so those two related. That will be very interesting. All right, well, I can't wait to learn from you tomorrow. Join us tomorrow again. We'll be on at the same time, starting at 11 EST, 4 p.m. UK. I think it's 11 to 9, 8 a.m. West Coast, and that is 6 p.m. in Cape Town, where you are. So we'll be back, even if it's tomorrow, if we're in our PJs, whatever. We're going to show up. We're going to be here and do it again.
oh, I've got someone special who's just joined. There's Thomas, my beloved. He's in Germany.
Oh, hi, Thomas.
My bonus son. We're just finishing up now. Yeah. So.
Well, I'll upload it in just a minute so you can catch the replay. Good to see you, Thomas. Heard lots of good things about you. Well, awesome to see you, Julia. I'll catch you tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. See you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hanging out there with the power cut or whatever.
Yeah, sorry about that. All right. See you later. Bye.
Bye, Jamie.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Today is day 3 of our 4-day series talking about toxic behaviors that create and escalate conflict in relationships. And I'm going to be chatting here in a minute with Coach Julia Seal. She's come on. I'm going to invite you, Julia. Let's see if I got the hang of it today. And today our focus is going to be on the behavior, the toxic behavior of sulking and stonewalling. Hi, friend.
Hi there.
Happy Sunday. How are you?
Happy Sunday. I'm good, actually. It's incredibly cold here. So I always want to go to bed and lie on the couch, you know. It's like...
Yeah, I guess it's not supposed to be cold this time of year where you are in Cape Town. No.
Midsummer. Yeah, it's craziness. Anyway.
It's wild. Stay warm. I've got a sunny day ahead of me, which is exciting, but it's always good to, you know, deal with the weather we have.
Yeah. Have you been cycling today?
No. Yesterday I did 45 kilometers in 2 different outings, one before we talked and one after. Yeah. So today is not a cycling day. It's a rest day.
Yeah, rest day.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about our topic today of sulking and stonewalling, because you hear those words and you're like, oh yeah, those are definitely toxic behaviors that we don't want to do and we don't want to experience. I'm really curious because I don't feel like I have a lot of kind of background knowledge on these 2 topics. So it'll be interesting to hear from you and learn how they show up, what they are, and then how we can kind of mitigate and avoid them. So I thought it'd be good to start out, you know, yesterday we always come back around to this topic of how to neutralize these behaviors not to react, but to respond. I thought it'd be good for you to give us kind of a reminder about that. If you didn't catch the videos that we've done before, this is our 3rd in a series of 4 about toxic behaviors that escalate conflict in relationships. So
make sure to check the rest out on Instagram. But go ahead, Julia, remind us what this is about neutralizing kind of the behaviors and responding.
Yes. So yeah, Jamie. So what we're talking about today actually is toxic conflict as opposed to conflict, which is going to exist in any relationship. So we need to just remember that that's what we're looking at. And it's very specific, toxic conflict. It is the conflict that's actually destructive to social relationships. Now, it's so interesting because often we just see conflict and we immediately make it a bad thing. And that's one that I really want to encourage people. The more you get comfortable with conflict and managing your kind of your inner reactions, you can stay in a conflict situation for longer, which is incredibly healthy for relationships, because then people get to say what they need to say. And, you know, today's topic is actually all about when someone feels like they can't speak up. And that's what's happening for some reason. So, you know, I think it's just really important to, and this one speaks a lot to the self-soothing that we spoke over the last 2 days and the inner management. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But to be really clear, you know, the word conflict, I think I put a hashtag or somewhere on my social, and, you know, people just go, oh, conflict, oh, panic, you know. And I think that's what we want to really move into kind of as we evolve ourselves, is how do we stay in conflict situations longer and longer in order to decrease the heat in the interaction, either if it's with you or in a group or between you and two people, and then build the relationship from there. So it's got a really great intent, is that the longer you can stay there in a neutral space, right? Not in a highly triggered, inflamed space.
Yeah.
But then you start opening up and bringing curiosity and a little bit of breath and lightness into the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, and today's really about, and I think maybe just to kind of define what we're talking about, because stonewalling is really what we call it in the coaching world, but I don't think a lot of people actually even know what that means. So I use sulking sometimes because a lot of us in midlife have teenagers around us, so we know what the sulk is, but it's really more like the cold shoulder.
Right.
So you're in the middle of an argument with someone, and we might actually do it ourselves. It's quite common to do it in our relationships, in our love relationships, right? You're in the middle of a fight, and then you just go, no, I can't talk anymore. And then you just
shutting down.
Shut down, right? And so that's really what it is the silent treatment. And then you can go like with a whole week of silent treatment, withdrawal and refusal to engage. And then in where you see it in teams typically is people being reluctant to express themselves and to add their opinion. So, you know, if you're sitting in a group of 8 people and there's always those people that are very quiet, have a look and see if there's something toxic going on there where they feel unsafe that they need to do that, you know.
That's interesting. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the root then of this behavior or this reaction. Where does it kind of come from? You touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear you expand on that a bit more.
Yeah, so this one shows up actually a lot when blame, criticism, and defensiveness, especially blame and criticism, are running rife in the interaction, right? So that interaction is full of you this and unskillful requests and you that. And so that's running around. And so that's, people are not, or the one person is not feeling safe. So this is a particular behavior where someone is not feeling safe. Now, we're not talking physically safe as in physical violence, but emotionally safe. So be aware, and we talked to the last 2 days about blame and criticism and defensiveness, that if you're seeing someone giving you the cold shoulder, or if you're feeling the need to withdraw, be aware that the dynamic that's going on in there is that blame, criticism, defensiveness, double side coin. But it's actually quite a healthy behavior when it's done quietly, quickly, and you move forward and through it fast. It's not healthy. The cold shoulder is not healthy if you do it for to your partner for the next 4 hours, right? Because
Yeah.
if you neglect conflict, and we talk about that tomorrow, that escalates contempt. So we don't ever want to neglect this. You have to go back into the interaction. But
Right.
with stonewalling or the cold shoulder is people are actually just trying to escape the other toxic behaviors, and they are overwhelmed with emotion. So they're actually too full, too full.
Mm-hmm. Is it an attempt to, maybe a misguided attempt to de-escalate the conflict, or is it just an attempt to protect oneself from the uncomfortable emotions?
I don't think it's coming from such a responsive place as trying to de-escalate conflict.
Okay.
It might be because if the conflict's very hot, like there's shouting, it might be a way of just, if you stop engaging with someone, the shouting eventually is going to stop. So it could be that, but it's not particularly skillful. So the person is not necessarily in the responsive mode, which is what we're trying to get to. It is still a reactive behavior to the criticism, to the blame that you're seeing, and then literally shutting down. So it's very much I'm not safe. I'm not safe to express myself. I need to tune out and I have to get away. That's really what it is.
That makes sense. Yeah. I have a question here for you. So let's say we're in a relationship where this stonewalling or the kind of cold shoulder happens often when we're expressing our needs or asking for something. The person that is choosing to disengage or stonewall or sulk or pull away may not realize the consequences of that behavior back on the other person. I wonder if you have some insights into how does that actually create more problems then in the relationship on the side of the person who's being stonewalled or.
Yeah, so if you're the one who's doing it, you have to be safe first, right? So we have to get to a place of safety before your executive functioning part of your brain is going to start working again. So, and you will only almost see that in reflection of the impact that this had on the conversation. And what I see, and I've coached a lot of couples in sort of couples coaching, is a lot of couples, they have a flaming row and then nothing gets said. One withdraws and then it kind of dies down, and after a week life goes back to normal and nothing's ever spoken about. Right, so that's how a lot of people choose to end a conflict situation in a relationship. But what it's actually doing is it doesn't garner you any respect from the other person. It builds contempt and it gives them more fuel for criticism. And remember that the original thing that you were reading from them, the criticism or the blame, was actually just an unskilled complaint on their part. So they're still not getting their complaint across. So they're just going to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, and it won't get more skilled. So you need to, in the situation again, is you will notice when you are too full. Some people describe it as they feel like their head's going to explode. It's like, Notice that and see what you need in the moment. Some people can bring themselves back to a responsive mode from that place with, a couple of breaths. But it's really healthy to just to say, I need 5 minutes time out. Or a really good one is, I need to go to the bathroom. Just hang on there, I need to go to the bathroom. And that gives you just that time to settle down. And then when you're settling down, to assess, how do I help the other person understand that I wasn't feeling safe in that interaction? And to be able to, you've come out and say, and it can be tricky here, because if someone is shouting and you're the one who's going into this cold shoulder behavior, you can feel a little bit kind of more special than them. Like, I'm the one who's been hurt and they're the ones that are hurting me. So be careful of that dynamic, because if you are asking the other person, help me feel safer in order to speak, you know, if they're still angry and they're still in reactive mode, that isn't going to help appealing to like, help me feel safe. So to have that conversation when all the heat is out, that can help. That can help. Yeah.
What is the difference between taking some time to let that heat calm down and giving the cold shoulder? Because there's maybe an element of perception too of how quickly the other person wants you to come back around and engage, and let's keep going with this until we figure it out. How can someone be sensitive about not being perceived as giving a cold shoulder when they're really just taking a time out to calm themselves?
I think to be as clear as you can. You know, I'm full right now. I'm a bit overwhelmed by what you're saying. I need 5 minutes, or can we talk about this after lunch?
Okay.
You know, so really, but kind of create that next space engagement. So then the person knows, right, it's going to happen again. And the more you do this, right, especially if it's with the same person all the time, they're going to understand, and they will start building a level of compassion, and they'll also see in themselves that something they were doing had that impact on you.
Sure.
And, you know, so it is a bit of a play. And if you do come back to the engagement, you know, when you promised you would, 5 minutes later or 2 hours later, then you continue the conversation in a different way. And so you reassured the other person that it's actually going to be resolved, that they are going to be heard.
Yeah.
You know, because you're being triggered by, you know, the two sides of it, right? You're being triggered, yes, by their words, because perhaps they are doing an unskillful complaint or unskillful feedback with a personal attack. So that could be very true. But it's also your perception of what they're saying.
Right.
He's attacking me, you know, I'm feeling powerless. This isn't fair. So it's almost a 50-50 relationship, or 50%, you know, them and 50% you, because you're perceiving it and reading it through your whole wiring. And, you know, we talked about how your brain filters what to let in to the executive brain. So if it's been primed to run when it hears people shouting, it's going to keep getting overwhelmed and full the minute someone raises their voice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think this is, it's a really interesting topic, because I think there's a lot of space for those of us that maybe don't have the kind of training or depth of knowledge that you do, to think that we're just doing something healthy by, you know, giving maybe too much space. We think a whole day, or I'll talk to you about this, too far down the line, and maybe not anticipating that cold shoulder, that even if we think we're taking it for our own good, it could be also impacting the other person, creating anxiety, or not making it worse for them as we kind of wait to sort through these things together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's important for the person on the other side. So if you're experiencing the cold shoulder regularly in an interaction, is have a look at how you're expressing what it is that you're trying to say. So really have a look and notice, are you saying, you should be doing this and you did that? I mean, I did it today with the way that when Fraser came back from the grocery shop, I was like, why do you always pack the fridge like that? And I was like, oh, what is that, Julia, you know? And so notice those words, and the minute you kind of throw out to you, why are you, got that personal attack. So if you're noticing that, you know, your partner, your friend kind of gives you the cold shoulder, have a look and see what you're doing that's contributing to it, because they are feeling attacked.
Yeah.
So make sure you clean up from your side too. And then if wherever you can, if you think back to what we were talking about on the first day about criticism and blame, is how do you express yourself more clearly? How do you say it again? How do you open up curiosity so that so that they might actually say something, ask a question, lighten it a bit.
Yeah.
Because all we're trying to do is neutralize that heat in the moment.
Yeah. This is good
And
advice.
the heat in our bodies is that very reactive feeling, right? And we all want to get away from that heat.
Yeah.
Whatever way it is, run away or explode heat, You're either a volcano or you're a train,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I want to also welcome the people that are joining us live. Thanks for showing up. If you have any questions for Julia or an angle you want to go at this topic of stonewalling and sulking, just let us know in the comments. If you're watching the replay, feel free also to leave something in the comments. We'll come back around to it and reply a little later. So I'm thinking, Julia, what's coming to mind for me is, we talked about criticism and blame on our first talk. Yesterday was about defensiveness. Today is about the stonewalling. I'm not the expert, but I see that these things are related. One produces the other, or one can trigger the other. And it sounds like this just creates almost a vicious cycle. I'd be curious to hear you explain a little bit how maybe stonewalling fits into, if there is kind of a relationship between these behaviors, how they play out on one another.
Yeah, I think they are all related because we all interact in different ways. And react in different ways. So, you'll have somebody who's using blame in a particular way is going to have you're going to get that typical response, but they are almost like a self-spinning loop. So for example, like we were saying, blame and criticism, the flip side of that is defensiveness. And then you have stonewalling. Well, people use stonewalling because they're too full, because they've perceived too much blame and criticism. And then what we look at tomorrow, contempt. Contempt increases the more you withdraw from engaging from someone who's trying to get across. So they are all interlinked, but you'll still and we all do all of them, right?
Sure. Yes.
We have our strong ones. We have the ones that we recognize first. So, and it's interesting because we might do one in a certain situation and another, we might do one with our love partner a lot, but actually at work, we might employ a different one. That's really interesting to see that. But, all you need to do is start playing with one of them. Because again, it's that process, that self-coaching process really of increasing your awareness to even notice what's happening to you in the moment. Yeah. And then starting to develop the insight after a bit of reflection about, what were the thoughts running in my mind? What is the emotion that shows up? What are the red flags in my body? And how might I want to kind of act next time?
Sure.
So, so just go to whichever one you typically do the most, because it will impact all the others. Because it's really about mostly two people, trying to talk to each other about something, trying to get their point of view across, trying to be heard. And there's a whole lot of stuff in between. That broken telephone that we played as kids.
Yeah, and there's never a single round where the message doesn't get completely twisted, no matter how you play.
And that's why we fight over the same, like a love relationship will fight over the same things over and over again, because that pattern has almost been established and wired into you, right? Between the two of you, you've almost wired it into the DNA of your relationship. So with one of you starting to act slightly differently, you start to unravel that wiring. So it's your own inner wiring, but it's also the dynamic between you that you set up for the same old arguments over and over again. And because you never resolve the conflict, so you never take the heat out. You can either take the heat out by actually going through the fire and sitting there together and finding out what the other one's trying to say, or you can just ignore it, right? And I grew up in a family where we just pushed everything under the carpet, and then it festered there for years, and grew spiders and snakes and things.
Well,
and
I think that could be.
Yeah.
That can be pretty common too. I think my family was a little bit more on that side as well. What are the consequences of like a long-term consequence in a relationship that has lots of this pattern of going into the cold shoulder, of kind of pushing the issues under the rug? What kind of happens?
Yeah, so actually with all four of these behaviors, these toxic behaviors, we are talking the breakdown of a relationship. They are absolute poison to a relationship. So the long-term effects is the reduced respect between the two of you, and ultimately contempt comes in. And once you have contempt in a relationship, you're very close to the relationship death. Takes a long time to get back from that. So that is why we want to actually look at these in the face and neutralize them as soon as we can, because they are poisonous. And, you know, the theory behind these comes actually from a couple of sources, but two sources. Are you okay?
I think my cat just threw itself against the door because I heard a sound.
I thought maybe it was another firework going on in Quito.
I think we're fine. I'm sorry. It just startled me. Go ahead.
So it comes from two sources. One, the Buddhists talk a lot about the mind poisons, behavioral poisons, and the antidote. So this work is informed by that. But then a guy, Dr. John Gottman, and his wife, they have taken these toxic behaviors and done huge amounts of research. They've got like 40 years worth of research on married couples. And they've done kind of, I think, 3,000 to 5,000 couples to see, and they can predict divorce by the amount of these four toxic behaviors that they see in a relationship. So
that should be encouraging, but it's also terrifying. It's like, okay,
yeah.
these are the four to pay attention to, really.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like definitely predicted to divorce, but what happens to a relationship where you never talk about stuff or you keep following the same patterns? You kind of you disconnect from each other, right? And that real love connection that you have with your sister or your mum or your partner kind of hardens and gets dull, and it's not life-giving.
Right.
So you're kind of going through the routines and the rituals. So possibly Christmas is fun. It's fun to get together because you've got all the family rituals and this is how we did it as kids. But is there really a huge upwelling of delight and love when you're together? And so any of these toxic behaviors, you know, there is destruction of the relationship, but destruction doesn't always mean you separate. It can just mean the relationship gets harder and harder and there's less joy in it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's definitely not a contributor to whole being happiness.
Yeah, right. And I love you keep using this word to bring lightness into things. I think that's beautiful because you start to even just imagine, gosh, all right, without some of these behaviors, how it would feel so much different to just show up in daily interactions with someone that you care about. And definitely lightness is the right word for it.
It is, because it's all you have to is a tiny little crack, right? You know, that famous song, and let the light in. Just a tiny little bit of light in, and it starts to shift things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know, and that's really important. So yeah, I think, and Dr. John Gottman, he actually talks about these four behaviors as the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, so, and the reason he calls them that, so if you're from a Christian tradition, you'll know the four horsemen, right, from the book of Revelation.
Oh, that's why I've heard of it. Okay.
War, pestilence, something, and death, right? And they come down and they ride through the world before the second coming of Christ. So they are horrific. War, famine, death, and pests or something, pestilence, horrible. And they're riding on their horses through the world. So that's how destructive they are. That's how poisonous
behaviors for relationships. I see. Okay.
Yeah. You know, and so the whole idea behind this series of 4 talks is is to talk about ways to bring it down a notch, bring the heat down a notch over the holidays.
Yeah.
Practice neutralizing even a tiny thing. You know, like we talked yesterday about what's the 2% truth of criticism behind a criticism. And that is enough to crack open something slightly different in the dynamic between you. And that's actually all you need.
Yeah.
And you keep doing that and keep doing tiny little positive shifts, tiny little movements, and the relationship will look completely different. Don't need to sit down and have one of those like long heart-to-heart conversations.
Yeah.
You can if you want, but you don't have to.
Yeah. And with the holidays coming up, you know, people be getting together more and more here throughout the month with the different holidays that different people celebrate. How can they bring more light into those spaces and those relationships if they are feeling kind of tight with them at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to our very first video that we did on the Q&A, and if you're struggling, like maybe there's just too much information that Jamie and I have been sharing over these last couple of days, is practice my favorite coaching tool, which is 3 breaths. And I can see actually I've got an old client who's on the call with us now, and she'll know all about my 3 breaths. She's probably laughing right now, because that is enough. If you're heading into the holidays and all of this is too much information, start using breath to bring yourself back to yourself, to self-soothe, right? Because that's what you need. Whenever there's conflict, you need to find yourself into this, find that safe space again, get back into the parasympathetic nervous system, wake that up, you know. And you could do 3 breaths, and another incredibly lovely breath to practice is a belly breath. So you're sitting at the dinner table, you're feeling like Father Christmas because you've eaten too much. Practice being Father Christmas, and you stick your belly right out and you breathe, and then you let your belly breathe out. And that's a wonderful tool to also use. And if that's all you're doing as letting the light in, that will change already how you're showing up in the moment.
Awesome. Good. That's great advice. Thank you. I know we're trying to keep these to half an hour. We've got a group coaching program coming up. It'd be great if you could just mention a little bit about that. And then we'll see what else we say before we go. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're copping out of that one, Jamie.
I talked about it the past 2 days.
It's fun. So what, Jamie and I have a 2-month program starting next week on Wednesday, which is designed to see us all through the holidays. So it's a small group coaching program for a group of women who want to really explore their relationships through the holiday season. And then into the new year, how do we take what we learned from Christmas and reset our relationships? And I was thinking about it today because, you know, don't be put off that if you're not in a high conflict relationship, this program is for everyone and it will work incredibly well. You know, even if there's one person who's in a high conflict situation, someone who's just really interested in learning more, or someone who's actually wanting to reset a relationship, we will learn from each other. It's actually a fantastic dynamic to coach together. So the idea is we meet weekly and we have a coaching session together every week. And then we also keep connected on WhatsApp. So we will support each other every day if we need to through WhatsApp. And yeah, you'll have 2 private calls with me as well. So then we can go deeper into what you're really learning, what you're really seeing, and how to set you up beyond that. So yeah, in a nutshell, I think it's really fun for relationships right now, you know.
Yeah. I wanted to hear how you explained it. You explained it very well. I want to add though, what I love about this program and working, you know, with a coach like yourself is it can be so hard to take these concepts and raise our conscious awareness enough that in the day-to-day we're applying them and living them and not falling back into our old patterns. So having a program like this and having Julia there every day through WhatsApp, and then this weekly small group of women that are all looking to achieve kind of the same change in their lives and learn around the similar topic. It's just a great way to make those behaviors stick and to really make the shift in your mindset profound, because it's not just you alone doing it. You're doing it with support of an expert and with a group of women who are all bringing our energy and our desire to change and improve and grow and bring lightness into our relationships together. So I love that about it, and I can't wait to start. It's next Wednesday, and the sign up link is in my bio here on the Lemon Rebellion page. I think on your page as well, Julia, to get through to it, so you guys can sign up for it. It's going to start on Wednesday. It's going to be awesome. We have just a couple spaces left, so make sure if you've been interested in this series of talks to go over to the webpage, sign up for the program. It's going to be really great, and I'm glad that we're doing this.
Be lots of fun. And so we will be talking this type of hot conflict. And then I will also be introducing some really interesting other concepts about power and inner power and relationship with ourselves. And then also, like, I will be teaching or possibly showing you through examples of my own life is how to self-coach. How do we learn to coach ourselves? Because this is the whole thing. I mean, I've been coaching now 12, 13 years, and why I'm so passionate about it is because you really do see change with coaching. But how do you get the change to stick? Yeah. As Jamie was saying. And so through the 8 weeks, we'll also be showing you techniques to use so these things stick. So it's not like a magic formula that you're suddenly different, but you're going to have so much more than you've got now, you know, and fun. It'll be fun to be together. Yeah.
I love the idea of, so imagine a compass, right? And you've got your needle pointed to due north. Now, if you're taking a walk and that's where you're headed, that's good. But if you move it even just a tiny bit one way or the other, over time, the destination you'll end up at, if you're walking in a line just a wee bit different on the compass, you could end up thousands and thousands of miles apart on a different path. And I think that a program like this, with focused on relationships and helping us grow, it's moving that needle in this moment a little bit this way. And the consequences are just compounded and amplified in the future in terms of how they impact our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with our loved ones, our family, our friends, our coworkers, and everyone around us, because suddenly you have skill sets and mindsets and new tools to literally transform every relationship that comes across your path in the future. And again, I'm also just in love with the coaching model. So I wanted to point that out, because a small change today can be a huge impact on your quality.
They do. And like, so a tiny thing that you do, like next week with us, for example, what you want to do is think about yourself and your relationships this time next year. Do you want to be in exactly the same place? Versus if you make a little tiny shift tomorrow or next week with us, and then that shift, you're going to keep doing those tiny shifts all the way through the year. And so this time next year, well, like, unimaginable, actually.
Yeah, that's exciting. Oh, awesome, Julie. It's always fun to talk to you. So tomorrow we're talking about the final of the 4 toxic behaviors, contempt, and this one will also be super interesting.
Yeah. It just sounds awful and toxic, doesn't it?
It does, but we can learn and we can see ourselves, because like you said, all 4 of these kind of toxic behaviors, like it or not, as evolved as we may be or not, like, we're all using them at some time in some degree, right, in our lives or certain situations. It's part of the beautiful, messy human experience. So we can always learn and grow. And tomorrow, talking about contempt, we'll be talking to the devil in the face, because that's a heavy one.
Oh, that's perfect. It'll be fun. Same time, isn't it? Same time tomorrow.
Yep. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks if you're watching the replay. Again, leave some comments. Let us know what you thought. And if you're interested in this program, check it out. The link's in the bio. We'll catch you all tomorrow, same time, same place.
Yeah. Bye. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. Hope you're having a great start to your week. Today is day 4 of our talk series with Coach Julia Seal on behaviors that create toxic conflict in relationships. This is our 4th video. The first one was on criticism, then we looked at defensiveness. Yesterday we looked at stonewalling, and today we're going to be talking about contempt and how this behavior increases conflict and damages our relationship. And I see Julia's here. All right, let's bring you up. It's always fun to do these calls. I love it. Hey there. Good morning.
Hi
Good
there.
afternoon. Hi.
Ah, yay. Can you believe we've been at this for 4 days?
I
Amazing.
know. I like it. I like it a lot. I actually think that we need to think about doing some different talk series like this with the topic of focus. It's really interesting, and I've been getting so much great feedback from people about what they're learning and all the deep kind of reflections that it's bringing up for people as they look at their relationships in their lives and see from the very skillful perspective that you share these 4 behaviors that really contribute to toxic conflict, which was great that yesterday you clarified for us. Not conflict. Conflict itself is not necessarily toxic. It's when it becomes toxic that's a problem, and that's really what this whole talk series is focused on. So I'm excited, and I'm excited about today's topic, not because I like it, but because I think there's a lot to learn about it, which, today we're going to talk about contempt, right?
Yeah, this is I think this is one that none of us like, right? Contempt just, yeah, and we definitely think that we don't do it.
Yeah, I think it would be good to start today because I don't know, for those of you that are listening, watching live, or catching the replay, when you think of the word contempt, what does it mean for you? How does it feel for you? But I'd love, Julia, for you to explain in a very, simple way what is contempt.
Okay, so if we think of it at its worst, maybe, things like belittling someone, sarcasm, cynicism, name calling, kind of being a bit belligerent. And then another one, which we might actually see quite a lot of, but not realize that it's contempt, is hostile humor.
Interesting. Okay. All of those, just you listing those, I feel them, and these are heavy, not fun things to have in a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why this is really considered the most poisonous of all the poisons. And it is usually kind of what happens if we haven't addressed the other ones in the course of the relationship. This is where it gets to. So when you start having contempt, and this is one-on-one, right?
Right.
Between the two of you, once you start experiencing contempt, or once you're feeling contemptuous towards another person, that person, and you're expressing it, there's quite a lot of damage that's already been done there. So if you think in a partnership, a business partnership or a marriage partnership, if contempt shows up, it's really showing like a long-term erosion of the relationship through all the other toxic behaviors. Really.
Sure. What's going on behind the scenes if we've gotten to that point where either we're, giving contempt in one way or another with those behaviors, or if someone else is sending that our way, what's really happened on the inside that makes that show up?
Yeah, and it is interesting because I want us to just think carefully about this as it being an interaction between the two of us, because we do see this contemptuous type behavior out in the public quite a lot. And sometimes sometimes even in families, when people are sniping about someone else behind their back, what we're talking about here is it's kind of direct.
Gotcha.
So, or it's within your earshot, right? So kind of hostile humor within your earshot. You see that a lot in business. But what's going on if you're in another room and it's happening? I mean, it's still just growing the other person's contempt the more that they keep saying that, but you're not actually experiencing it. So be aware that in the office, there's actually a lot of contempt flying around in the office environment, less in a marriage partnership or a business partnership, and also quite a lot in families. But then in families, it's often done in another room. So what's really underneath it, Jamie? It's not very nice. It just is a way of conveying disgust and basically condescension.
Yeah.
So it's almost like someone has decided and is feeling contemptuous about another person and is really not seeing them as an equal human being in their eyes.
So there's a loss of respect, a disconnection with even seeing the humanity in some ways of the other person.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so easy if you see how contemptuous behaviors can happen in public, right? Because we've got all these belief systems about certain types of people or certain race groups, or women are all like this, or men are all like this. And there's a contemptuousness in the belief systems that run often very quietly below the surface of what's going on with us. And so that's what often shows up in the office environment. But in a family, it's fueled by really long-term misunderstandings and long-term not clear communications that are just built up and built up. So this is like the escalated, and it can be it might not even be hot, right? Like in the others, like anxiety and blame and criticism can be very hot conflict. This can be very cold conflict from the one side. But just like you say, I just have to say the word like sarcasm and belittling, and we all get that feeling, right?
Because we've experienced it, and we've probably dealt it too at one point or another.
Yeah.
It's so nice. Yeah, it's very
Well,
nice.
think of kids and name calling, right? And that kind of bullying shows up even in adult relationships. Well, in grown-up relationships, but they might not be adult relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I have two kind of questions or ways I think we could go with this, and I'm super happy for you to choose what feels like the right next step. But one, I'm thinking, if you feel like, if you're listening or watching this and you feel like, oh yeah, I do that stuff, I think it'd be interesting to talk about how we can begin to become more aware of that in ourselves and kind of draw back from it. But then the other side would be, if you're in a relationship or you have someone in your family, you're going to see them soon over the holidays, and there's this dynamic of contempt that you are on the receiving side, maybe you deal it back as well. How can people also deal with that, in dynamic with someone else? So whichever way you'd like to go.
Yeah, either way. And actually, I thought I'd start by referring back to something we spoke about yesterday, about there's always two protagonists in conflict, right? There's a victim and a persecutor. And like blame and criticism is the opposite side of defensiveness, there's always a victim and a persecutor. So again, you're seeing that play, victim, persecutor. So what we're always trying to do, whether you identify as the victim or the persecutor, and it takes a lot for us to identify as the persecutor.
Yeah.
Right? We will always, even if we are perceived to be doing the persecuting, we will turn it around and make ourselves the victim. So it's quite fascinating how we do that. But so remember that what we're trying to get out of in the hot conflict situation is this duality of role, victim, persecutor. You have to step out of that, because and so these little tips and tricks are giving you that tiny bit of pause in order for you to step out of that. And that actually, the theory behind that comes from, something that was developed in in the 1960s, called the victim triangle. And it was a way of understanding what goes on in conflict. And this is very interesting in families because it's a triangle, right? So you have victim and persecutor, but in the triangle, you also have rescuer. And so there's an interplay. So if, for example, in your family, you're always trying to get involved between two people to calm the conflict down, or don't be so mean to so-and-so, or shouldn't, you're actually part of the conflict, and you are actually escalating the conflict because you're not allowing the clarity of communication to happen between the victim and the persecutor, which sometimes has to break down before we can fix it again. So the rescuer thinks they're doing an amazing job, and lots of us are rescuers. Sure. And wanting to save the victim, and actually we're not helping. So we, another way for, to get out of that as the rescuer is to stop getting involved, right? Just be the witness. And then, because none of these little tips I'm giving you is your role. These are tips either for the victim or the persecutor, if that makes sense. But it's a very interesting tool to look at yourself and where are you and what are you doing in one of those three roles. Because even if you see yourself out of that, especially in the family, are you actually playing a role as some kind of enabler, some kind of rescuer?
Yeah, that's interesting. And in any given conflict, can we shift positions depending on how the conflict is going?
Oh, yeah. And, the thing is, because we're talking about issues of power, someone who is feeling victimized will often lash out, right, to try and take the persecutor role. That's why it's an ongoing thing. It never resolves. So if you're big enough to, all of us, to admit that maybe sometimes we are contemptuous of others, it's a big thing to admit. So take a deep breath if you're there. And, I think a little pat on the back if any of you listening are going, sometimes I do use hostile humor, and sometimes I name call someone, even if it's in another room, right? So you're telling your mum about something that your sister-in-law said or something, be aware that all just is part of it. But if you're doing it and you notice that you're doing it, stop it. Just stop immediately. So as soon as you become aware of that sort of sarcastic voice, that kind of slightly snarky way of talking to somebody, stop. Because you are headed down a one-way route of hot conflict and a broken relationship. That's really important for long-term marriages and partnerships. We get to often say stuff to each other thinking, because you've been together for 20 years and this is the way we've always been. And you sometimes listen to how old married couples talk. It's not very nice.
Sometimes that's true, yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really important to remember, and this is interesting because often when you are in that sort of persecutor role, is think about respect, because what it is lack of respect. And someone who's standing in that role actually is coming from the position that respect is earned. So that person that I think these things about needs to earn my respect, needs to do these things for me to be able to respect them again. And we need to remember that respect isn't earned, respect is given. So they don't have to earn our respect. They give us their respect. Actually, when possibly we've earned it in a way, but it's better to think of it as it's something that is freely given. And so what you want to be doing is stop and kind of like stop and admit, right? And sort of keep going. take that back step, and then try to go back to what we're talking about in the other 3 sessions is clarity, clarity, clarity. What are you really trying to say? And can you say it without the personal attack?
Yeah.
Remembering if the conflict's already hot, that person is going to hear an attack even if there isn't one.
Right. So empathy is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, because you've got to remember that the other person is now, they're triggered possibly, and their little hackles are up, and so they're going to be hearing everything as criticism, and they're going to be going back into defensiveness themselves.
Right.
Or lashing back. So, to keep really stopping yourself and then tapping in when you can in a reflective moment. If you do have someone in your family, especially ahead of the holidays, in a reflective moment, someone you don't like, ask yourself, can you see their humanity?
Yeah.
Is there anything about them that you might like or respect? Because when we go into our family dinners and things, there's always like, old uncle so-and-so, or my brother's such a racist, or my sister's this. There you are, you're in contempt, right? And that's why I say we all do it, even though it sounds so awful. So really see, and it needs to be in a reflective moment. It's hard to do it in the moment. The other person's greatness, right? Find something about them that is amazing, so that softens you. And like we said in the other sessions, the minute you can soften something, the heat softens down in conflict.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for how, I'm sure anyone listening that identifies with that situation probably just had a face and name came to mind. And then when you said, find their greatness, probably was like, ah. Do you have any tips or guidance on, if there is that strained relationship with some elements of contempt in it, how can a person begin to see that greatness when maybe they feel a little bit blocked or resistant about that in that relationship?
Yeah, and like I said, it needs to be in a reflective moment, right? So not in the midst of everything. But the Dalai Lama gave advice once on how to do this. And he said, just picture going through their life one day as if you were them. Try and see through their eyes, their life through their eyes. And there'll be something there that creates a tiny spark of empathy or compassion, or a little bit of your history together, that there was a happy memory, something you'll find. And then you hold on to that feeling. And I thought that was quite nice. That's quite nice advice, because the minute we can put ourselves into someone else's shoes, no matter how much we don't like them, I don't know about you, but I almost get a rush of affection for that person.
Yeah, because you feel both the empathy and the compassion coming together of, okay, there's something divine in all of us. If we can just peel back the layers of our conditioning or judgment or complicated emotions, and connect with that in every single person. So I think that's a beautiful thing. That's cool that the Dalai Lama said that. It's pretty wise.
Yeah, well, we know he's wise. And listen, he's the embodiment of compassion on this earth, so he should know this better than any of us, right?
Yeah, true. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Good. For those of you, I was just going to say, for anyone watching live, if you have any questions, throw them in the comments, or if you're catching the replay, leave them as well. We'll come back to them, because this is an interesting topic. And I feel like contempt, among the 4 things we've looked at, we did criticism and blame, defensiveness. Yesterday was about stonewalling, or that kind of cold shoulder, shutting down and not refusing to engage. And then today, contempt. These are all things that all of us do at one point or another. I want to repeat that because yesterday at a lunch talk, some friends were asking me, what have you been talking about in these lives? I saw one of them. I want to watch the rest. They're really interesting. And somebody said, oh no, well, I definitely do stonewalling. Then to my husband, and he's across the table from her. And she looks at him and she's like, what happens if we don't, move through this? And I could tell she was really judging herself. And I said, Emily, it's okay. Oh, I shouldn't have said it. I said to my friend, it's okay. We all do these things. Sometimes the idea is to be aware and not to judge ourselves harshly for it, but just to see it and move through it. So I wanted to point that out because these are not weapons to hurt one another with, nor weapons to hurt ourselves with in terms of judging, but just really a level of kind of awareness and vocabulary to start to think, right, how to move through them and become more whole and improve those relationships. So I wanted to point that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point that you make. And I do want to get back to what to do if you're experiencing it so that people who are listening can tap into that. But I think what you say is really lovely because we are so good to take anything that we learn from the sort of coaching world or the world of personal development and use it against ourselves. I remembered my first foray when I was walking the dog just now, and I remembered my first foray into personal development, self-help field was a book that I found somewhere, I don't know where, called Your Erroneous Zones. And I found it at like age 13, right? And it sounds like your erogenous zone. So I remember my mom looking at it like, what? And then I think I realized now what a terrible book that I started out with because, it was more like, well, what's wrong with me that I need to fix? And so much of my journey and my own journey has been about like, oh, I become aware of these things. Now I need to stop it because it makes me a bad person and I could be better than. And I really just almost want to say that the whole point of whole being happiness, which I'm passionate about, is the loving of yourself for everything. So yes, we can get better, especially in our relationships, because that's a fabulous place for growth. And we can be kinder and more compassionate and more gentle in the world. We can. But we need to be that with ourselves and to not, like Jamie says, using this as weapons, either against ourselves or even against the other. Because if you start picking up that your partner's using stonewalling, for example, and now you say to them, hey, stop stonewalling, you always stonewall, well, then you're into criticism yourself.
It's a very good point.
You're name calling, right? Which is what we're trying to get from.
Yeah, it's like same game, new players. You're just following the same patterns, but with new tools.
Yeah. So, what to do if you experience contempt?
Yeah.
So, like you said, again, with that, we can all feel what name calling is like, what it feels like. We get that like whack in our stomachs, in our hearts, in our breath. Again, with all the toxic behaviors, the first thing is the awareness that what our body and our brain has filtered those words, and we've let them inside ourselves, and they are having an impact on our physical body. So feel that. Notice your impact.
Yeah.
Right. Then again, you need to breathe, always breath, because you are trying again to step out of the automatic reactive mode and to step into skillful responsive mode. And so the skillful response here is when someone says something that's contemptuous, is to ask for clarity. And a great question there is to say, can you tell me a little bit more about your intention with what you just said? Because it goes what's underneath the words, and it's an immediate question to the other person who suddenly goes, it's quite interesting to watch it in action, right? Because it's almost like they get wake-up call.
Right.
Maybe I didn't say that well,
Sure.
or maybe my horrible, ugly belief system is showing through in my words. It's a very powerful question. Gently, don't shout it at them. It's a gentle question. So what was your intention? And then it can be useful, depending on the relationship, is to express your feeling and then your willingness to dig deeper and resolve what's going on. If it's a very contemptuous relationship, expressing your feeling, it might be too hot. Like I'm feeling belittled right now, could increase the other person's contempt, because they will perceive that you are playing the victim role. So if need be, you want to take a step out for 5 minutes to just manage your own feelings before even expressing them.
Yeah.
We in a relationship, a close relationship, we often make the mistake of, and it comes from the self-help industry, right, of just expressing our feelings and expecting the other person to care. So we almost vomit out our feelings because now we want the other person to take responsibility to help us feel better, because it was their fault that I'm feeling these things. Yeah. So when you're expressing your feelings, it is really good to be doing it from a place of responsive mode, where it's not in the middle of the hot conflict. So if you're in the middle of the really hot conflict, you're going to use a question of, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about your intention with that. Once it's downscaled a little bit and you're wanting to dig underneath it, then you're going to start using like, oh, that felt, when you said that, it felt really sore when you said that. But I'm sure that's not what you meant. What did you mean?
Yeah. I can see how that would be quite disarming, because it gives the person a moment themselves to respond, to pause and respond. What did you mean by that? Oh. Oh. And it takes some of the sting out of it, because I also can imagine, and I myself have had moments where I felt contemptuous. You say it and you know it's going to hurt. So when the person doesn't come back with another criticism or defensiveness, it disarms the conflict. It takes some of the heat out of it. And I can see how powerful that is.
And that's really what we're trying to do, right? Is with this series of the four talks, is to look at, the kinds of the behaviors that escalate conflict, that make it hotter, and that then, that are destructive in the long run. And we're looking at very simple actions to cool it down. But what will ultimately resolve things is to be able to have a conversation when both of you are in a more responsive, less triggered state. And the encouragement really is to have those conversations, because we don't really want to. So that's why we're so good at putting stuff under the carpet until it flares up again. And then that is why it's never resolved. And that is why, like I said yesterday, the love in the family, the love in a group, the love and connectedness in a team actually weakens. It kind of gets hard and brittle, as opposed to being warm and open, if you never look at these things. But there's also a whole different type of family where they want to put everything out in the open too. And, that's where I want to warn people of, again, this thing about sovereignty over your own emotions. It is not for your family members to make you feel better. It is really about owning our own emotions and not blaming so-and-so for how they make you feel.
Yeah.
So that's really the most important thing. And that is all of this conflict and this hot conflict is about like skills that we didn't get, right, when we were growing up, and we certainly didn't learn them at school. And so really this is what coaching is trying to do, is to tackle it at its core, okay, which is emotional ownership, or emotional adulthood, or EQ, or all of these nice words that they've now thrown at it now, or, you know, emotional whole being is the one that I love. But it is about our emotional life is ours, and no one else is actually responsible for that.
That's so important, isn't it? Because that way you can take the actions that you need to take, or just build the awareness that you need to build to feel what you want to feel, and not be so feeling pulled around, reacting to the conditions around us, external to us.
Yeah, and we're taught, I mean, think about this message that we get on the playground. Oh, you mustn't make little Johnny sad. You mustn't make him cry.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, so it's totally putting up, like, we are socialized totally into that our emotional whole-being belongs in the hands of others. And this is why a lot of this relationship work, no matter whether it's hot conflict or whether it is, you know, just the dynamic within a team, a lot of this relationship work is deep inner work, right? It's relationship to yourself. Because I can tell you, if you're name calling people out there, you're pretty much doing it inside. You know, so it all ends up looking at you and the relationship that you have with yourself, your current self, your past self, and your future self, and how you think about her in all those forms, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm already imagining in my mind's eye how incredible it's going to be to spend 8 weeks with you, going deep. And, you know, we've done these talks and they've been really profound, at just half an hour a day to go into 4 different of these toxic kind of behaviors. But I'm just imagining how amazing it will be to go once a week with you into topics we're actually guiding us how to apply these in real time to relationships that we have. You know, we're anticipating the holidays coming up, maybe with our romantic partner or our children or whoever's, you know, in our daily lives as well. Things come up, and to have you there to help people work through some of these things in real time and reflect and take that kind of observer, distant role to more consciously come back and respond. I think that is so incredible, and I want you to, in a minute, you can share a little bit about what that program is going to be like. But I think that's amazing. And for those of you that are just joining us, this is our 4th of 4 conversations around toxic behaviors that create and escalate conflict. And we're doing these talks as a build up to a group coaching program that starts this Wednesday, December 8th, around relationships and building capacity really to get rid of some of these toxic behaviors, have more authentic and loving and light and living connections, not the dry and brittle. And Julia is the coach that's going to be leading that. And if you don't know about Julia yet, I can't imagine how, but she's an ICF certified coach. ICF is kind of the gold standard in the coaching industry. And we're creating this kind of offering together with Lemon Rebellion to help women come together to look at those relationships and begin to change just that needle, that compass direction a little bit, to get on a path where these relationships can become more fulfilling and loving and peaceful and satisfying now and in the future. So tell us a little bit about
Amy. I mean, come on, we've got a healthy conflict.
Okay, healthy conflict is good. Well, you see, I need coaching because I keep blocking that, because I think I probably subconsciously believe that all conflict is to be avoided. So that, for instance, would be a topic to kind of bring up and work through in a coaching session, like, you know, like the program that's coming up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I said yesterday, I put the word conflict on my social media in red text, you know, and everyone was like, yes, conflict, terrible, awful. And it's like, how can you not have conflict unless the other person is just constantly agreeing with you, and then are they being their authentic selves? You know, and so I think it's so exciting when you can have conflict and not be triggered that it's terrifying, right? And that you're basically that you go into that automatic freeze, flight state, because conflict's awful, right? So if you're thinking conflict's awful and it shouldn't be in a relationship, then how do you show up like that, right? You're going to be in that. But so the whole thing of coaching is to get you out of that, get you out of that thinking that it's a really bad thing, but then also into what are the healthy ways of having conflict and conversation. And, I think what's really exciting, and I'm glad that people have found these 4 days helpful, because it is actually the thinnest level of support that I can give you, because we're talking about little actions to take. What's really, really powerful, and this is where coaching can be transformative, is when we start to coach on the emotional level. Right, like we talked about emotional whole being and emotional maturity, EQ, and then also coaching at that, like in your belief systems, and what's going on there, and what's going on in your whole kind of think, feel, act cycle that is your inner wiring. That's where the coaching is really exciting. So if these little tips help you in your conflict, then I can promise you coaching is going to be profoundly more than that, and more fun, right? Because you're going to feel way more empowered to try these things. At the moment you're probably thinking, oh, Julia, contempt comes my way and she wants me to say, well, so what's your intention about that? You're thinking, well, that's never going to work, you stupid woman. And I'm like, but I think that's what's so exciting, is that, if you, these little tips and tricks help, it is extraordinary what coaching does on top of that when we coach at a deeper level. And that's what's exciting, and that's what's exciting to spend 8 weeks together doing, because we work on all levels, right? And even we work with the relationship with yourself profoundly, because that's then how you show up in any situation, and that's a matter of inner power. And holding our inner power, because many of us are very powerful inside in many relationships. Okay, and then there's one where we go to pieces.
It's true. Isn't that so true? And it's not that we don't necessarily have some of the tools, but that in some relationships, for whatever reason, it falls apart and it eludes us how to manage it better. So that's incredible. I'm really excited about what's going to come from this program, and I can't believe it only starts in 2 days. We have just a few spots left, so we're going to leave that. The link is both in my bio and on Julia's page there on Instagram. You can get to it from her webpage. And we were talking about how people have more questions and want to contact you directly to ask you some things about the program. Maybe they're interested, but they're like, what is group coaching? How's it going to work? How can they get in touch with you for that if they have questions?
Okay, so if you want to join the group program that's starting on Wednesday, then I would suggest jumping on a call with me right now, either today or tomorrow is Tuesday. So we've got all of Tuesday and Wednesday to chat if you want to talk about that specifically. So that's really easy. You could either, in Jamie's bio, there's a link there, or you can go to my website, which is Happiness-Matters.coach. And there's a bright little yellow jigsaw puzzle piece that says Coach with Julia. And then you can book a discovery call with me. And then we can talk about the relationships and if the group coaching is right for you, or if you want something more one-on-one. But the group coaching is fun. It's really interesting, because we're talking relationships and in a group. So it's very fascinating. It's such fun. Like a double dynamic, right?
That's awesome. Well, and it's so useful sometimes to hear other people's stories, because when you're like, oh, they did that in that relationship, that's a struggle. It's sometimes easier to identify ourselves in someone else's story than to be so brutally honest with ourselves in our own stories sometimes. So I like that about the group kind of experience, is you can be fully present, take away tons of value, but the spotlight is not always directly on you. You're able to absorb some things sometimes from what's
Mm-mm.
going on with others.
Yeah, it's a great source of insight actually to watch someone else being coached, because what they're being coached on might not be something that you are kind of triggered on in that moment, but you will see what she's doing to get herself into that space. You'll be able to start unpacking it. And that ability to watch somebody unpack their own brain helps you to do it yourself. Because when you're coaching, like when we're in a coaching conversation, you're in it, right? You're in the narrative, you're in the story, you're in the emotional experience. And yet watching it from the outside is very fascinating. So there's a huge learning for people to do that.
Yeah, cool. I'm so excited for it. I can't believe that it starts in 2 days. It's amazing.
I know. It's so exciting. And really, just before the holiday season, I think couldn't be a better time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it gives us a chance to, as these kind of social interactions amp up and we're around people that maybe we don't get to see too often just because of distance or busyness, gives a lot of fodder to
You know, I'm just thinking, I saw something on the BBC today, an article on the BBC about it's becoming a common trend to kind of disown your parents.
I saw this article. Yes.
It. And I was like, no, don't do that. Have coaching first.
Yeah. There was a term for it. They said it used to be called parental divorce, but now it has a different term. Yeah. Very. It's unfortunate, but you know, we talked yesterday about how it just seems like the modern, I don't know, ebbs and flows of information, energy. It's like they're pushing us to just move away from anybody that disagrees, that isn't perfect, that maybe has political opinions or some issues that maybe we really deeply disagree with. And I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, as long as we're not in physical bodily harm's way, if these are people in our family that are going to be around, that there are different ways of dealing with those things than just cutting people off that can be a lot more fulfilling in the long term. And we don't have to be comfortable in every moment with every person if they disagree with some things that we say or we disagree with them. I think it's a radically different kind of model than maybe you hear for the most part out there.
Yeah, and I think it's a worrying trend, right? Because as the world becomes more of a global village, we should be getting better at embracing our differences, not cutting out people that we don't agree with, right? Because conflict is going to happen the minute you meet someone who's different to you, including your own love partner.
Sure.
Yeah. So we should be learning how to be better and being uncomfortable in relationships and being around people that we don't like or that don't fit our mold.
Sure.
And if we can be comfortable in those relationships, then for me, then it's much more exciting to think about us as a global village, that we can get on with anybody and we can come to closer understandings with each other. We can create the clarity that's going on in the misunderstandings so that we do actually start creating a world where there's space for all of us. But we start shutting people down, boxing people, feeling that we're better than people. That's very contemptuous, you know?
Yeah. Right.
We
Yeah.
stop the conversations, and the minute the conversations stop, the conflict escalates. And then where are we really, you know?
Yeah. That's very interesting.
So your family is on a small scale, but it's like the world in one place. You're going to have all kinds in your family. And so those people are going to be there all over the world. And you can't just cut people out of the world. They're there. And they are influencers, they are voters, they are people, they are people with a say. So the more we talk, the better, and living in Africa, that's the best proof, right?
Yeah.
Like if we weren't able to talk and we weren't able to de-escalate conflict the way that we are in this part of the world, we'd be in a much more difficult place.
Yeah, it's true. I said yesterday, I love how you use this word lightness about the relationships, and what I hear today is also openness, curiosity, tolerance, respect, because that's what keeps the communication open, whether it's in a family, whether it's in communities, like you're saying, groups who tend to put themselves against kind of others by ideology or whatever the thing may be. I like that. I like those words: openness, curiosity, respect, tolerance. Yeah.
Because we all want to, I mean, if you think of the word curiosity, it's such a lovely word, isn't it? I mean, that just implies that we've got our eyes open to the world and the world is delighting us. So if you could drop into that, I'm experimenting with what I'm seeing, being curious about what's going on in our family, being really curious about what's going on in ourselves. It then just changes your dynamic and the way you already are showing up in that relationship. And I was just thinking as you were talking, this is such an interesting meditation, and you might have done it, the loving kindness metta. So in the loving kindness meditation, you start with yourself and you wish yourself well. And then you wish someone that you extend it out to someone within your really close circle that you adore. So like your child or your dog. And then you extend it further out and further out until you are trying to generate a feeling of compassion for the whole of that continent. And it's so fascinating, like, to watch where you stop being able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because along in that pathway, something will get stuck somewhere. Like if you have to, let's say, think of your mother-in-law and extend love to your mother-in-law, and you just go shut down. And so that's, be curious. That's so interesting. What's going on there?
Yeah.
That's a great sign to tell you that there's one of these four is somewhere in that relationship. And that just by you showing up a little bit differently and applying one of these little tips, you can start to shift that and lighten it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do. When you called it loving kindness meditation, I thought, I haven't done that. But when you described it, I realized I have. It's Vishen Lakhiani, the founder of Mind Valley, has a beautiful meditation that he created called the 6-phase meditation. Each one of the phases has a different purpose, and literally the very first phase is exactly what you just said. Yeah. So without him, he calls it a compassion meditation, but
yes, because
he must have based it on the loving kindness practice, because I know that's
kindness. Well, loving kindness is a word of it. It is a word used to describe compassion in the Buddhist tradition. So the translation of compassion is basically loving kindness.
Okay.
Because if you think of what does loving kindness feel like inside, yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one way of looking. But for all of you who are in hot conflict at the moment, me talking about loving kindness meditation is not helpful.
Well, it's helpful to know that it exists, and maybe those are the things that we're aiming for, right? That we want to move towards, and certainly with the support, like of the program that's coming up, this 8-week program, that's something people will absolutely move closer to, which will be exciting.
Well, it's a good sign if you do that meditation and you get stuck. It's a great place. Even if you're thinking like, oh, all my relationships are fine, I'm like sorted. Do it and see where you get stuck. There'll be something delicious there to go and explore,
Awesome. All right, Julia, I think we should wind up where we went long today because there was so much good stuff to talk about. But just to remind anybody that's listening, if you found this helpful, you feel like this series of 4 talks around these 4 toxic behaviors that really create and escalate conflict in relationships has been helpful, we have an 8-week group coaching program that Julia is leading, starting on Wednesday, December 8th. You can find the link to that in my bio. And Julia is also offering a free call in case you want to just ask some questions about what does this program look like? Is it right for you? You can find that link on her website, which is, do you want to say it again?
Happiness-Matters.coach. Happiness-Matters.coach.
Yeah, good. That'll be great. So we hope to see you there. Hope you've enjoyed these talks. It's been a really fun series to do with you, Julia. Thank you for doing this with me. It was fun. I know I learned a lot. That's the best part of my job, is I get to learn from
That is a great part of your job.
Yeah, the other incredible coaches kind of within Live in Rebellion, because everyone has such incredible things to offer. So thank you for enlightening me and inspiring me as well. And I can't wait to get through this group coaching program. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So look forward to it. And also just to thank everybody for listening to all these calls.
Yeah.
And to Jamie and I chatting. Jamie and I, it's an excuse for Jamie and I to chat anyway. So yeah.
Yes, sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you in the program, and leave some comments what you took away from this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you later. See you, Julia. See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this Happiness Matters podcast, coaching your whole being happiness in midlife. To join Julia for more of her midlife conversations, subscribe for free to her coaching notes by email and to this podcast. Search for Happiness Matters in Midlife to find us in your favourite podcast player app. Once you're subscribed, both of these will be delivered to your device automatically. To find all of this, click the subscribe menu of our website, Happiness-Matters.coach. That's Happiness-Matters.coach. COACH. And thanks again for listening.